Right, welcome to this afternoon's meeting of the Oversight Committee. I'd like to welcome the members of the committee who are here today, and I'd also like to welcome officers who are here, and members of the public who are here in the gallery, and also anyone who's watching it on the webcast. Today is the December meeting of the Oversight Committee. And we've got a number of matters on the agenda which we will be getting to very shortly. But first of all, can I just ask you all to put your phones on silent, and if you do put them on silent but still have them on vibrate, can you not put them in front of the microphones so that the microphones don't pick that up? And I'd now like to ask the clerk if you could tell us whether there are any apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We've had apologies from Assembly Member Deval.
Thank you. Right, the second item on the agenda is declarations of interest, which are found on pages 1 to 4 of your agenda pack. Can we note the list of offices which are listed there held by Assembly members? Thank you. Now, could I also ask members if anyone's got any disclosable pecuniary interests in any of the items that are listed on today's agenda? No? Okay, thank you. Right, if we move on to item 3, that's the minutes, and we're looking at the minutes of 3 meetings, the 6th of October 2022, the 13th of October 2022, and the 9th of November 2022. These have already been circulated to everybody. Can I just see if anyone's got any objections to them, or are those minutes agreed? Agreed. Okay, I will then sign them as a correct record. The next item on the agenda, item 4, is the summary list of actions, which is found at pages 21 to 32 of the agenda pack. Can we note the completed and ongoing actions which have arisen from previous meetings of the Oversight Committee? Okay, thank you. Item 5 is London and Partners' response to the report which we have recently produced on the governance of trade missions, and also covering the issue of the GLA Code of Conduct. Can we note the response from London and Partners to that report? Is that noted? And I'd like to bring in Assembly Member Pigeon at this point, who I believe may have spoken to London and Partners directly, because the report was produced when you were the chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, since we received this letter, I've met with Alan Simpson and talked through our recommendations. They have really embraced these and found it really helpful what we'd recommended, and making improvements in their processes and so on. So I think that's really positive, and I hope the other part of the report to the Code of Conduct we will be able to pick up with the new monitoring officer going forward.
Yes, that's good to know that the new monitoring officer won't be bored when they first start, and that they will have something to do there. Item 6 is the Secretariat Quarterly Monitoring Report, which is found on pages 43 to 54 of your agenda pack. And I can see that Assemblymember Russell would like to comment or ask a question on this report.
Just very briefly to put on record the thanks to the Assistant Director for Scrutiny and Investigations for the work that's happening to get the scrutiny operation into good, robust shape, and that is really appreciated.
Yeah. I think that's a viewpoint that is widely shared amongst the committee members from our earlier discussions before we came in. So is that unanimously endorsed by everybody? I think so. Okay. Thanks very much. Okay. And Assemblymember Hall, did you want to come in as well?
I do, please. The report states that a secondee from the House of Commons has been part of the scrutiny team since August to lead on quality assurance and editing of scrutiny products, to deliver targeted training and development for the scrutiny team. So the report says this included standardising, formatting and copy editing, and building a style guide for use across committees. Can you provide examples of what this included and what tangible difference you think it's made?
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. The secondee is actually just about to finish up her rotation this week. For the last 4 months, she has been the main editor of all committee briefings that have been coming out to all committees, so that as they go from the main researcher, they have been edited and standardised at that secondee level. And she has used the information gleaned from that process to design and deliver a few pieces of training directly to members of the team, and she has also, as it says here, started to put together some guidance. That's both substantive guidance, which we're starting on now. I wish we'd been able to start a little bit earlier in her time here, but she's given us a framework for that. And also, as it says, a style guide, which is still in development, but is addressing some of the inconsistencies that have been emerging across briefings, and to try to bring those down in future.
Okay, I don't know if any of us met her.
She has been very much a back office type person. A big part of it was dealing with preventing backlogs and delays rather than direct member contact.
Okay, the report says this includes delivering a range of training to support quality improvements, including weekly writing clinics.
Yeah.
So what did these writing clinics comprise of?
They did differ. So the writing clinics was times in which she was confirmed available, so that people who were either writing briefings or who had received comments back on their briefings could go and speak to her about them, about how to avoid problems in the future or how to address challenges that they were looking at. So they were sort of acting as a writing mentor sometimes, and sometimes actually directly addressing problems. So they were in person or online, and it depended on demand.
So was there a great demand?
I'm told it varied, but yes. Initially, I think it took a little while to get started, but my understanding is, yes, there was demand across most of the slots that she offered.
Okay, and who will be doing that when she's gone?
The writing clinic itself will have to consult on whether we want to take that forward or if that was useful just in a short-term capacity. I think in terms of her work, some of it will fall back to me, which is where it sat before she arrived, until we consider whether to get another secondee into that role. Other parts of the training are, of course, already absorbed and being implemented by the senior policy advisors and the policy advisors.
Okay, and the report says this included establishing new academic and external partnerships that will support additional future capacity and provide further development opportunities. So which partnerships did this include? So
that's, I'm not sure how much I can say on the record because it's not fully established yet, but we are talking to academics at UCL about placements, offering academic placements here in the Assembly Research Scrutiny Team to either support directly committees or perhaps support rapporteurships in future. So that's a topic that's she's established that relationship for us, and we're taking it forward now.
Okay, fine, thank you.
Thanks.
Rapporteurships, I remember them. Yeah. Blast from the past, as it turns out. Can I just see, is there anyone else who'd like to come in and make any comments on the Secretariat Quarterly Monitoring Report? Okay, can we note the Secretariat Quarterly Monitoring Report, Quarters 1 and Quarters 2, 2022-23? Noted. Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to item 7, which concerns some proposed changes to the GLA establishment in the Strategy and Communications Directorate, and I think Niran will answer questions on this, and I know that a number of Assembly members have already indicated to me that they will have some questions for you, and I'm going to come straight back to Assembly Member Susan Hall.
Thank you. So Niran, how will the success of the Strategic Partnership Unit be measured?
Sure. So in terms of the work that we have been doing already around recovery and how we have measured kind of the relationships that we have built, what those relationships have given us, particularly through the missions, some of that work will continue with this team. The Strategic Partnerships Unit will specifically focus on a number of key relationships, continuing to include with government, with boroughs, with London councils in particular, and it very much builds upon the relationship that we have worked really hard to cultivate over the last 2 years, particularly around the pandemic. It's really difficult because we are a corporate resource in order to put in like actual performance measures, but that is something that we will absolutely look at in terms of kind of what successes we have, particularly around kind of how it is that we work with influencing legislation. That is something that we already track within the government relations team, but also as we continue to work, particularly on the missions going forward, and the work that we continue to do, particularly with what will be the recovery board, the next iteration of the recovery board. Okay,
so perhaps when you've decided how you're going to measure it, you'll let this committee know,
will
you?
Absolutely.
And how will you determine value for money from the changes made to the team?
So that is really important for us. So as you will see, I am reducing the number of FTE that I have because the recovery team is stepping down. It was, as you know, a 2-year programme of work, and so we're reducing by 7 FTE. I am growing by 8, so materially 1. But more than anything else, the work that in particular, the 2 people from what is left over from the recovery team. So we'll have 2 individuals. They will absolutely be working on. So we're reducing from 7 to 2. They will be working on the next iteration of the board. We've done quite a lot of work to establish the board up until now. We realised that we don't need such a big team to do that, and therefore we are reducing the size of it. But additionally, where most of my growth is here is in the support that I need to ensure that my directorate runs effectively, but also in terms of the work that we need to do across directorates, so making sure that we don't have siloed working and making sure that team is able to bring in the intelligence and things that are happening across the organisation to ensure that we as strategy and communications, which is a real central corporate function to the organisation, can work and prioritise our work effectively.
Okay, now given previous consultations, such as the City Hall move or the move to the 4-week pay cycle, or even the Mayor's ULEZ consultation. So how confident do you think that those consulted will feel that their views are being listened to?
I very much hope so. So I've already started the programme of consultation with the teams. So I have met with all the teams individually. I've also met with the managers and anybody impacted by this. We have set up a mailbox as well where people are emailing us with their questions. I am looking at those questions on a regular basis and responding to them. At this time, most of what we've had in terms of response are points of clarification, so a real understanding of kind of what this team does and how we build quite a cohesive unit in itself. But what the most important thing is that once the consultation ends, and we've just extended the date of the consultation actually to the 13th of January to ensure that we take in consideration the Christmas period, so giving people a little bit more time than the 30 days that is set out. But it is important that I, and along with the teams that are moving forward into this space, will actually build this unit together. That for me is incredibly important because I've got some really good people who've got enormous amount of professionalism. So it is important that we work together to bring these teams together into a cohesive function.
But you see, my next question, how do you ensure that those consulted are listened to? I mean, going back to what I mentioned, City Hall move, none of us wanted to come here, yet here we find ourselves. I know there was mixed thoughts about 4-week pay cycle. And the Mayor's ULEZ consultation, there are very, very many people, thousands of people who do not feel that they've been listened to in any which way. So how will you deal, or how will you cope with the criticism that you do consultations and then don't take a blind bit of notice of what people are saying?
So I'm absolutely taking notice of what people are saying. So I can only comment on the consultation that I'm running, and the consultation that I'm running includes lots of communication with the teams, and they, and I have been very, very open about the fact that if anybody wants to speak to me individually, they can absolutely do so. And like I said, I have taken time over the last 2 weeks to meet with every single one of the teams impacted.
Well, I'll just say I hear what you say. I just know consultations and anything to do with the GLA seem to be a complete waste of time for people that don't agree with something that you clearly want to put in. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblymember Hall. The next person who I had an indication from was Assemblymember Pigeon.
Thank you very much indeed. You just said earlier, but just to clarify, because the recovery team is stepping down,
yes,
effectively this is a growth of 8.
Yes,
in
that's
your
right.
Team.
Yes.
Okay, so it's not quite how it's presented, but I'm interested in the top tier. So you had 8. recovery's going.
Yes.
Is there a change in any of the grading between your current structure and your new structure where you've got 6? Are there any increases or decreases in gradings?
So there is only one role. So what I would say is all the roles that are being created, all 8 of the roles will go to job evaluation, which is part of our HR process. So the job descriptions are currently being written, and they will go to job evaluation.
That's
so
the new 6 roles.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So that includes the new AD role. So that will also go to job evaluation. The one role which will change is what is the government relations role, which is currently a grade 13. And what I'm proposing to do is to expand that role to bring together both the government relations function as well as what is the residual recovery roles. So that role materially changes. So the individual who is currently in that role she was the first person I spoke to. She has been notified of that. So as the paper indicates, that is the only role that will change. Where that comes out in terms of grading, that is subject to it going to evaluation panel.
Okay, so you said you were creating a new assistant director. Where's that? Explain that to me.
That will be the head of the new business unit. So that will be the AD for the new business unit.
Right. Okay. And then, but the other grades we don't know yet, so they could well go up
or down. Yes, they could.
Or down.
Yeah, they could.
But
indeed.
if you're merging 1.5 posts, if you like, into that could well
that's
go
a
up.
potential. That has the potential to go up. So
Okay.
So the roles as I've written them in the paper are indicative at this time because they have to go through an evaluation panel.
And presumably some people are at risk.
So there is one role at risk, which is the government relations role.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And the next person I saw was Assemblymember Best.
Thanks. Hi. Slightly following on from what Assemblymember Pidgeon was saying there, so this gov relation role. Sorry, so the roles and responsibilities. What does that fall under in the new
Sure.
structure?
So yeah, let me just. So if you so in the annex, so where you've got the new unit, which is the strategic partnership business unit, so that will fall under the head of strategic partnerships and public affairs. So it's that blue box.
Okay, thanks. And you mentioned there about work becoming siloed, but it did strike me that obviously you're moving from one where you had 8 reports, and yeah, I can imagine that's quite a lot of line management there, but clearly you'd be more across to now
Yes.
2 separate units, which does perhaps leave a vulnerability there to have less of an idea of what's going on across those 2 units. So how will you make sure that it doesn't become siloed and that doesn't happen?
Of course. So the way I work with my teams is I meet with all of my direct reports on a weekly basis. So we have we absolutely have face-to-face time every week. And there are a number of teams where, and particularly in this business unit, so very similar to the recovery team, for instance, where actually there is quite a lot of my time that is absolutely focused on this, because it is so critical and so important, and at particular times, say when we're going through sort of a spending review, or it may well be an autumn statement, etc. Then this will absolutely be where my focus is. So I have a clear set of understanding and a prioritisation in terms of all my units, and I would meet with this new AD again on a regular basis.
Okay. And my final question was, I was just looking at this head of international relations, which is the role that falls from being a direct report to you to ultimately, if that were me, I'd almost feel like I was getting the demotion there, and perhaps that's got an effect on the work I do, and I'd also feel slightly put out that now I had access to you as my line manager and to raise problems, and now I've got to go through this 2 tiers to get to you. Yeah. What was the decision? Why was there a decision to do that? And are you concerned about that occurring?
So I have spoken to the head of international relations, and I do meet with him regularly. They have how can I put it? A lot of access to me. I am available to speak to any of them at any time, regardless of whether or not they are directly managed by me or not. And like I said, there will be times where I will take an absolute focused interest in the work that they're doing, because actually this is particularly it might be a particularly busy time for them. But yes, I absolutely understand how that could feel like, they're being sort of demoted, but that is absolutely not the case. Their role does not change. Their team's role does not change. Their reporting line, yes, it does. But I will ensure that I am aware of what is going on. If that's not directly through the head of international relations, then absolutely through their AD.
Just finally, perhaps through the chair, I'd be really interested in the next year or so to see how this is working.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to come back.
I thought you were going to say that how devastated you were to see the loss of the person who has responsibility for liaison with the EU, but clearly I was barking up the wrong tree there. I'm going to move rapidly on to Assembly Member Russell, who also indicated she wanted to come in.
Thank you. Yes, my question is about the Digital Experience Unit. And so it seems that that's bringing together the sort of technology group and the external relations digital. So presumably that's about having a kind of not just tech on its own, but tech with thought about how to communicate so that they come together. So I just wanted, and obviously that's all happened quite recently, 31st of October.
Yeah, it was part of last year's budget.
And we have just had a kind of quite difficult experience with the changes to the website.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to flag the importance of communication with users of these sort of outputs, because when the website was upgraded, things like members' questions database, which I note is up and running properly now and can be sorted by member, but we went through the last Mayor's questions without being able to sort our questions by member, which is a really, you do it a million times in the couple of days when you're finalising your questions. You're constantly in that database. So it's really important that the different bits that are sitting together understand how different parts of the GLA use what they're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's fine. So just in response to that, so as part of last year's budget, this was this unit was created. So we are in the process of. So we recruited a new digital director who started her role in September. When she started her role in September, we then started to bring the teams together. So she's in the middle of kind of creating that. We also, as part of the budget last year, created some new roles within this unit as well. So we've also been going through a process of recruiting as well. I have had conversations and discussions with Helen, the Assembly AD, about these very specific issues, and she, so Vicky Ridley-Pearson, who is the digital director, has also ensured that we have worked quickly to kind of rectify as many of the issues that you have absolutely raised. As part of the work that we're doing, which is focused on the internal transformation, so making sure that that the processes that we have in place, because they absolutely need to be looked at and they need to be much better than they are. So we've got a whole programme of work going on around that. Communications has absolutely got to be the centre of that. So we need to make sure that, in particular, we have a very, very focused view on users and user testing, and making sure that works. So absolutely, I will take that feedback back, and Vicky and I will pick that up.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thank you for acting on it. And just one piece of positive feedback, I've just been shared of a sort of trial of the new members' landing pages, which looks rather interesting and good. So they're doing good work. But just that point about communication with users was important. Thank you.
Okay. Can I just see if there's anyone else who would like to come in on this item 7, the proposed changes to the GLA establishment, strategy and communications? If not, could I ask the committee, we're recommended to respond to the Chief Officer's consultation on these proposed changes. Can I see if we're minded to accept the changes? Are we, yep, no dissent? Thank you, that's accepted. Right, yes, obviously we don't expect you to stay for the whole of the meeting, but you're very welcome to do so. As is a traditional comment, we'll only be here till about 6, so looking forward to you staying. Actually, we're going to move over to item 8, and I'm going to come to Lucinda Turner, who is the Assistant Director for Planning and Regen, and I believe also Phil Graham, who's the Executive Director for Good Growth. We've got proposed changes to the GLA establishment for the planning unit, and I know that Assemblymember Hall has got some questions that she'd like to ask, but I would like to ask. I think we're looking at a situation where 10 years ago we had 240 stage 1 and stage 2 cases coming, which are planning cases that need to be looked over at stage 1 and then stage 2 by the Greater London Authority. Obviously, there's work being done in the local authority planning applications committees. That has now gone last year to over 400. What is driving that increase over the last 10 years?
It's a reflection of the level of development activity and the scale of that activity. So the more complex applications get referred to the Mayor. Those are the ones that we deal with. And just we all know the impetus and imperative to deliver more affordable housing, to help regenerate kind of communities, to deliver the commercial floor space, etc. So it's a reflection of that. It tends to, you tend to be able to see dips and peaks in relation to wider macroeconomic factors. So kind of 10 years ago, there were, as you say, far fewer cases. It's been relatively stable over the past kind of 3 years, and this year kind of, so it's at a higher level, but it's been a bit more stable over these past 3 years, and we're tracking it for this year just to watch out for any impacts from wider kind of macroeconomic factors again and kind of recession, but yeah, it's purely a reflection of both the level and complexity of the activity.
And it's been like that for 3 years. Perhaps there's an argument that says we should have increased the staffing in the planning team 3 years ago then.
There have been some increases at various different points. One thing we wanted to do, so last year, about a year and a half ago, we did argue for additional resource, which we did via agency, kind of on the assumption that perhaps it might kind of start to kind of vary a bit more, or it might reduce. We haven't seen that, so that's part of the reason we are here today, seeking to switch from the agency resource or a proportion of the agency resource to more permanent resource.
Okay, I'm now going to bring in Assemblymember Hall, who has some further points to make. Thank you for that.
Yes, thank you. How will the success of the planning department be measured?
I think in a number of ways. We have some explicit timescale targets that we need to respond to stage 1, stage 2s, and our pre-application kind of service also has timeframes for responding. We monitor key indicators like affordable housing in terms of the work of the team and the viability team in particular. We've seen how that has significantly increased over the past 3 years, so it's objective outcomes around those. We also try and do some qualitative assessment in terms of relationships with boroughs and others, which takes time to kind of, those are the things that tend to get stretched if people are kind of trying to deal with too many applications and haven't got the kind of capacity. And then we would also, in relation to the proposals around apprentices, we would also measure that in terms of success in increasing the diversity of the pipeline into the sector and of our team, and would be hoping that we could help support people to qualify as our TPI kind of planners as part of that. So I think there's a range of factors, some quantitative, some qualitative.
Okay, and the report states the proposals have been developed because of the need for effective delivery of the GLA development management because of statutory requirements, but also to create a fairer, greener and more inclusive city. So does that mean that there currently isn't effective delivery of the GLA development management?
It means that we are proposing this to be able to keep up with that effective delivery. So as things are becoming more complex, I mean, London is a very complicated city in which to develop. It's a dense urban environment. We have climate crisis and imperatives around net zero. We are constantly striving to increase affordable housing. All that takes time and resources. So I would say it is about keeping up effective delivery, but we always look to improve. And part of the challenges from committee members has been around engagement and how we communicate and other factors. So I would say it's about ensuring continued delivery. And
how will that change that you're doing, create a fairer, greener and more inclusive city? How will it do that?
By doing kind of through planning, we secure affordable housing, we secure transport infrastructure, we secure good design, we secure climate adaptation. It's by implementing all those things through planning applications that we kind of deliver that good growth and the Mayor's objectives which are set out in the London Plan.
So more of the same, really?
Well, continuing to, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I've had an indication from Assemblymember Best as well.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, I was thinking on those growing applications, it's probably as well a factor that the Mayor has now started calling in more applications which authorities reject as well, which is also putting that work onto the team. I was interested in our report 4.3 says that there's an aim that the GLA is more reflective of London within the planning team, and then it goes on. And I think you just mentioned it's Assembly Hall, so clearly quite a key aim of this here. So when you're saying that, what are you talking about?
So on the first point, in terms of call-ins, this isn't in direct response to the kind of volume of call-ins. They've been relatively stable. We have 2 this year, and they secure their own income, so can facilitate kind of resourcing if we need it. In terms of the diversity of our planning team, we are not at the moment reflective of the London we serve. The particular proposals here are around 2 apprenticeship roles to try to get more diverse entrants into the sector. The built environment sector is not known for being as diverse as it should be currently. The ability to do recruitment into permanent roles will also allow us to follow the kind of good practice and the outcomes of the Equal Group report and embed that.
That's what it says here. Just what when you're talking about diversity, what do you mean? What underrepresentation are you talking about?
So we are underrepresented in terms of Black, Asian, minority ethnic staff. We are underrepresentative, I would say, in terms of social kind of class and issues like that. The planning profession is a pretty middle class profession. We are underrepresentative in terms of disability. As most local planning authorities are across London, it is not a particularly diverse sector currently, which is why we have spent a lot of time over the past year and a half developing the schools outreach programme, for example, to try to encourage school children across London to get engaged with planning and to think about coming into the profession.
So obviously you have a limited amount of roles, so what's your focus on recruitment? Is it just
I think it's
prioritising anyone from those backgrounds that you just mentioned?
It is in line with the focus of the organisation as a whole. You know, we've been quite clear in our response.
Could you put your mic on?
I thought my mic was on.
But I took this when I read it. You were talking particularly about the planning team, though. So I was asking particularly what your goals were. What? Because I just wanted to know really what that meant.
I've got the microphone. Is that working better? Thank you. The goals of the goals in relation to the planning team reflect the goals of the organisation as a whole. You know, as within the GLA as a whole, we've identified that we have the most significant gaps in terms of Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff and in terms of disabled staff, and that's been the focus of our changes to recruitment practices and so on and so forth. The planning team is an area reflecting exactly, as Lucinda has said, wider issues within the built environment sector, where those gaps in terms of black and minority ethnic staff and in terms of disabled staff are particularly acute. So alongside the sort of the broader changes to recruitment practices, we are looking at particular efforts that we can make to bridge some of those gaps, and that has led to the work that we've done within schools and with the wider industry to sort of build the pipeline, but also the proposals here, for example, to create new apprenticeships focused specifically at bringing new people from more diverse backgrounds into the organisation. But it's not a question of there being different priorities, it's simply that this is one of the teams where those priorities are most acute.
Thanks. I don't think it really answers the question. I think it's a lot of buzzwords without actually talking about what you particularly want to do, to be honest, but thank you anyway.
I've also seen Assembly Member Peter Fortune. I'm just going to remind Assembly members that we are trying to get to a paper that we'd like to finish at 3, but I just wondered on the point that Assembly Member Best was making. I mean, I think it's really important that we're not patronising and implying that in some way that black, Asian, minority ethnic staff can only come in at apprenticeship level, because I think it's really important that we are not just saying, well, we're going to recruit people into, you know, very junior roles. I think we need to be offering a lot of support to people so that they can develop their careers. We don't want people, you know, stuck at the bottom of a snow-capped mountain that they're unable to climb.
That was certainly not my intention, and we are making the efforts at every level. I think the kind of issue around apprenticeships was particularly in relation to the kind of the previous requirement for people to have degrees, kind of etc., which excludes some people from it. It wasn't implying that it was particularly black, Asian and minority ethnic communities in that. Sorry, it was more a kind of wider point. We are making every effort at every level.
Okay, well, we're going to come on to some of that discussion, I think, when we hear from the Equal Group. But in the meantime, Assembly Member Fortune.
Thanks very much. The Chair gave me a warning about what we're going to get onto, which is looking specifically at the BAME and the disability paper, which is coming. But you got my interest when you talked about making sure we get people from across the class spectrum as well. I've not read anything about that in any of the papers for today. So what specifically are you doing there? How are you outreaching across that class spectrum, and how are you measuring it? How are you defining certain spheres of class?
We haven't got to that stage yet, but we are aware that at the moment, kind of many of the planning kind of positions that we advertise have required degrees, for example, and qualifications, which kind of, and we have done outreach work with universities, but by that stage already, it is clear that kind of there are plenty of people who haven't kind of accessed that way into the profession. And talking to schools in our outreach programme, they have identified a desire and a kind of benefit from having different pathways into the profession. So that's what we're looking at.
So it's based on educational attainment. It'd be really interesting to see what other metrics you can look at. I think Prince Harry's only got A-levels. So, you know, it's a very blunt way of measuring it.
I agree.
So,
I take the point.
I think our recruitment of royalty is probably somewhat limited.
I think you're probably looking for work in a minute, to be honest. But I'd be really interested to see how you measure those.
I take the point. It is a much more complicated issue.
Thanks.
I think the pool of applicants may be quite small as well. I'm going to thank you very much for the questions, and thank you for the answers from Phil and Lucinda. We've been recommended to respond to the Chief Officer's consultation on the proposed changes to the GLA planning unit. Can I just see if everyone's happy to accept the proposals? Yep. Okay. Right. We're now going to move on to today's principal business, which is the GLA workforce report and the Equals Group's independent review of the workforce. We are going to, as a result, take agenda items 9, 10 and 11 together, and they are 9 is the workforce report, 10 is the independent review by the Equal Group, and 11 is the GLA workforce report and the Equal Group review together with our, and that's with our briefing. And at this point, I'm going to say that if Lucinda, I mean, obviously, again, you are very welcome to stay, but we will also be devastated and very hurt if you lick no, we won't. We'll completely understand why you might wish to do so. But I think everybody else who's on the panel will then be the panel and will answer the questions for this first part of this discussion. So I would like to, well, obviously I've welcomed Phil Graham, who's the Executive Director for Good Growth, and I've also welcomed Niran Mothada, who's the Executive Director of Strategy and Communications, who've already answered some questions on previous papers. I'd now also like to welcome Shakira Keddo, who is the Assistant Director of HR at the GLA, and Mary Harpley, who's our Chief Executive. So, without further ado, we are going to move on into the first set of questions, and we're going to start with me, as is traditional. First questions from the Chair. And I'm going to start with you, Mary, actually. What are the key workforce changes since the workforce report was presented at the last committee meeting in June 2022? And Shakira, you may want to come in as well.
Thank you very much. So since we presented in 2022, I think certainly the thing I would like to highlight most is that we can see some tangible improvement in the profile of our workforce, and particularly in the representation levels of Black, Asian, minority, ethnic staff in the GLA. That's now 34% of our staffing population. It was 32% at the end of in the report in June 22. But in fact, since 2018, we've now seen a 10 percentage point increase there. So the fact that we're now at 34% is a real development from last time. The other thing that we can see, and of course the two are linked, is that our recruitment pipeline, when we look again at candidates from Black, Asian, minority, ethnic backgrounds in particular, we see more of those candidates in our recruitment pipeline right the way through from applications through to appointments. And so in the in March, which was the June report, we said, I think we saw 50% of our candidates, our external candidates, being from the Black, Asian and minority ethnic community. Now that is 57%, and we've got 51 half of our appointments of external candidates now being Black, Asian, minority ethnic candidates. And I think, you know, as pleasing and as notable is that when we look at our internal candidates and appointments from internal candidates, the percentage of internal candidates in applications has stayed the same since March, but the proportion of those candidates, internal candidates being appointed, has now increased. So again, for internal applications, 47% of our appointments are now internal candidates from Black, Asian, minority ethnic backgrounds.
Well, I've got a couple of points that I'd like to just make on that, though. I mean, obviously, we've moved City Hall to Newham, and we've been here since the end of March. We're nowhere near reflective of the local population in Newham, which is definitely more than 34% Black, Asian and other ethnic minorities. And another thing that I notice is that the headcount has increased. The number of full-time equivalent posts has gone up by 142 since we last looked at this report. So that's sort of 6 months. And I just wondered if you could tell me why that is. And then finally, something that I do find quite difficult is I think we're going to come on and talk about pay gaps, but we don't seem to be addressing the pay gaps between men and women, which seems to be quite dramatic, and also the pay gap between Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff and other staff. So I wonder if you could just comment on those as well.
Okay, so we judge ourselves at the moment against the working age population of London, of which before the census results that are now appearing, 40% of the working population of London, working age population of London, black, Asian, minority, and ethnic backgrounds. So 34% plays until the other day to 40%, and so that's what we are shooting for. Newham, of course, where we are now based, is one of the most diverse, if not the most diverse, boroughs in the whole of London, but we work to the average across Greater London. So that's the first thing I would say. No doubt we'll get into what the new census numbers tell us and what we should be shooting for in the future. Maybe we'll get into that next time. So yes, we're not there yet, but what you asked me about the difference between the report we presented in March and the report we're presenting now, and we see a further improvement in representation levels.
And we've got this increase in headcount, but I also wanted to ask you about agency workers who've been in post between April and September. So we seem to have both an increase in agency and an increase in full-time equivalent in headcount. I don't know whether there's a link there. And then also about the pay gaps, which we don't seem to be addressing as yet.
Shakira will want to come in some of this. Pay gaps, we don't have any more information on pay gaps in this report than we had in March, because we report pay gaps once a year.
Oh.
So there's no formal change on pay gap information between the two reports. We'll have to see what that looks like as we have to give notice of publishing those pay gaps, the reports, and those will be published in the spring. So that might be better to speak about at a future event. Headcount and establishment. So you're right, the establishment has gone up. So at March it was 1,363 FTEs, and now in the end of September it was 1,464. So that's your 101. So quite a lot of that headcount was contained in the budget, of course. We always see some headcount increases in the first 6 months because they come directly from the budget. But the large part of that headcount increase is externally funded posts. And there are jobs, new jobs in building safety, which I've been to this committee with on several occasions, and new jobs funded by adult education budget, particularly in boot camp, skills boot camp and skills multiplier, that represent the lion's share of that establishment increase.
Okay.
But what we're trying to do, though, now is to make sure, as new jobs become available, as well as vacancies from current jobs, is make sure that we are filling those at a higher representative rate than our existing population, because that's the way we're going to see improvement.
But we also seem to have seen the increase in the agency staff as well. So we've had the increase in establishment, and my figures actually were slightly different to yours. I've got 1,322 at the 31st of March and 1,464 at now, making the 142 increase. So perhaps we can check as to why you think the previous figure was 1,363 and not 1,322. But yes, I mean, if the headcount has gone up, how is it the agency staff has gone up as well?
Well, so we have agency staff for different reasons, as I've explained to the committee previously. As we know, we have been dealing with some recruitment delays and issues, which I am increasingly confident we will now see the back of. But we have had some of those, and we have allowed people to bring in agency staff to cover some of those lags and delays, because the work still needs to be done. So that has driven some of that. Some of the increases in externally funded posts, as we know, we're very grateful for the money from government for some of these posts, but sometimes it comes with relatively short notice, and we get on with some interim and agency appointments sometimes to those roles too. And Phil can probably help with some of those. So, we are very careful about what staff we take on into which jobs and which jobs we create, full stop. The same care applies to how we take on agency staff and for what reasons. I think we will see those agency numbers begin to drop now as we go back into a sort of a more stable recruitment process.
Okay. Did you want to come in as well, or shall I just move on to the first of the other Assembly members?
I was just going to, agree with what Mary was saying. Actually, with regards to the increase of agency workers, it is about actually having a direct resource there as opposed to running, a full process sometimes as well. So it's about having that balance. And I would say, kind of if we're looking at the overall hallmarks of the kind of the things that, from your original question, to have a 2 percentage point up in terms of the Black and Asian minority ethnic representation is quite big. Working at other organisations and working across the public sector in the HR space and seeing that times the space in where we've had the 2% increase, it's quite a big significant move. And it's just not underplaying that at all, to be honest. That I'm just kind of reiterate that is quite a big substantive move in a very short space of time for any organisation, particularly kind of a public sector one such as us. So just to kind of reiterate those points, really.
Okay, thank you. I've got Assembly Member Prince is now going to take over with some further questions.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. Mary, just following on with the questions around agency staff, we know that the Mayor is very keen that we don't have a high percentage of agency staff. I think you yourself in previous meetings have committed to reducing the number of agency staff. Do you have a percentage figure at the moment of agency staff? Or if not, maybe you could let us know.
Well, we report in this latest workforce, don't we, 91 agency.
That's not a percentage, though, is it? I mean, I could probably get my calculator out and work it out. But right, so what would you say would be your target? You've said you're working now towards reducing the number of agency staff. What would be your target?
That's one of those questions that depends on the circumstances that we're in at any one time. We had previously worked to the view that more like 60 to 70 agency staff at any one point felt reasonable. We've been running above that for a little while. Assembly Member Prince, the answer is not no agency staff.
No.
Agency plays an important role in any sort of workforce. But we would rather have positions filled permanently by permanent staff for all sorts of reasons. But so if you're putting me on spot and saying that's broadly, I think, where we need to be. Yeah. And we are, we are always trying to balance keeping that number low, but getting the jobs done.
So at the moment you're running around about 6%, I would calculate, if you're saying 90-ish, and then you're now saying that your target would be nearer to 4%. Because I do appreciate in some parts of the organisation there may be a need for more agency staff, especially specialist areas where it's hard to recruit and there's a transitional period. But I think we should have some kind of a reasonable target percentage figure, because you say 60 to 70, but the establishment's forever changing. In my experience, in my time here, it seems to be ever upwards, but one can only live in hope that it'll go the other way one day. So I think we should look for some kind of a percentage.
So I'm very happy to take that away and give that a little bit more thought to try and set ourselves a percentage. Phil, I don't know whether you, because Phil's one of the,
Yeah.
the users of agency staff as and when
I mean,
needed.
I think it's an absolutely fair comment. I think, and a fair challenge to put to us. I think there will be a question around how you set the percentage against GLA core staff versus perhaps against some of the externally funded programmes, which are shorter term, often require rapid start-up, in some cases aren't appropriate for sort of permanent contracts at all. So I think there's a bit of balance there about what exactly we're setting the percentage against. But I mean, as we've just seen with the discussion we just had about the planning paper, I mean, what we are trying to do is to move to a world, certainly on where agency staff are being used appropriately. And we had previously had a system of using agency staff in planning, which was intended to respond to peaks and troughs. It's become clear now that we face a context of pretty much permanent peaks, and we're seeking to accept that and to move towards move those roles onto permanent contracts. But I think it's a fair challenge that we should have in mind, where we want to be, and I would be very happy to work with Mary, alongside Mary, to work out how we express that.
Yeah, thank you. Because it's always good to have a target, because if you don't have a target, you can't hit it, can you? Whereas if you have a target, you may not be able to hit it, but there may be good reasons why you haven't, and that would make the explanations far simpler. We'll leave it there if that's all right. So moving on, I've got a question here. What are we doing to ensure the GLA have the right skills within the organisation to deliver effectively for London's, and how are we monitoring the impact?
Yeah, so I've been looking at this, obviously in my role and being still fairly new to the GLA. There is something about how do we manage learning and development within this organisation. So part of my new function, how I've set up my new function, is to look at learning and capability. A lot of our roles, a lot of our training courses, I should say, are mandatory. But actually, how do we do proper skills assessments around what is required? How do we improve the performance of the organisation through development? Looking at kind of the last set of staff survey results data, that kind of tells a picture around, our staff feeling that there's limited opportunities. But when I look at kind of the plethora of courses that we've got going, not everyone's kind of dipping into those. So there is something around actually how do I translate something that the organisation requires and needs, particularly as we move to TFL and kind of the offering that's there. And there's lots more mandatory courses that are there for sure. But it's about how do I now manage that as part of my new function, and how do we dig deeper and find out exactly what is required?
Yes, because there is the report that is done on exit interviews, and one of the main reasons was career or lack of learning and development was actually one of the reasons why we have a higher turnover. So you think that now that we're part of TFL, as you say, we may be able to address that? Yes, no? And what do we do? Do we ask staff if they need training? I mean, it's all well and good. I get this at my council, where they offer training courses or whatever, but they don't actually. Well, I don't know what they do, but do they actually say to people, "Well, what are your needs?" rather than just offering generic training opportunities? Do we not tailor opportunities?
I think, Assemblyman Prince, it would be good to, if Phil talked to a couple of examples in his area, and then I'll come back on the wider point.
I mean, I think there are certain areas, and I think again planning is one area where there's a very clear sort of continuing professional development requirement and curriculum, and we managers work closely with their staff to make sure that they're following that they're meeting the hours requirements for professional development and so on. I think, candidly, the challenge that we have had as an organisation since I've been here is that kind of culture hasn't been as strong more widely in the organisation as it might have been. I think that relates back to the work that I know Shakira and her team are starting to look at in terms of how we support managers and leaders to make sure that they are having, what should be happening is that what you might call proper development conversations are happening between managers and their staff, and managers are talking to people about, where they can address gaps in their knowledge, but also what they might need to do to take a step forward. And then there is a significant curriculum available, but people aren't going to be able to just sort of access that and understand it completely independently of those conversations with people more senior within the organisation. On my side, we did run a sort of overarching kind of expression of interest process in learning and development opportunities about a year ago, just under a year ago, and that's allowed us to both identify, where people are looking for learning and development opportunities, and we were able to support a number of those through the budgets that we put together, but also compare them against what we thought were some of the gaps as the senior leaders, for example, around programme and project management. And we were able then to work with the learning providers that are available to the GLA to create opportunities to put more people through those programmes, and we're continuing that process. But I think that's, I think there's a cultural change going on here, which a lot of people within the organisation are responding positively to. But as these exit interview results recognise from back in March and before, there's still some way to go in terms of that process of change.
Yeah, I get the point you make around planning, but that's a poor example because it is effectively a profession. Ergo, all those things are in place, and it's those members of staff who are not professionals or have aspirations to improve, and you can only really do that on a one-to-one basis. It's having regular assessments, regular meetings with your line manager, and establishing what the needs or what their training needs are. Surely,
I absolutely agree. Planning is an outlier here, which was why I was talking about the broader work that we've done. I think a lot of that is about those one-to-one discussions, and we need to embed those one-to-one discussions more fully. I do think there is a bit more that you can do beyond that, which is in the gap between kind of you have formal professions, and then you have individual development, but in the middle you have what you might call sort of professional functions. And the GLA requires heavily on programme management skills, it relies heavily on contract management skills, it relies heavily on analytical skills, and these are functions where there are people working in those areas across different parts of the GLA. And I think that was something that came out through that kind of process that I ran, that there are people in all kinds of different parts of my directorate, and I'm sure that's true more widely, who have similar training needs, reflecting the type of work that they do and the type of functions that they work in. So I think you can bridge the gap, but I think you need to look at this from all angles. You need to make sure that the individual conversations are happening. You need to be thinking about those functional requirements, and you need to be supporting people who are in those formal professions.
I'm going to leave it there, but I'm hoping that what you're saying is that we're going to have a slightly more structured approach. And will you be able to demonstrate that in some way in a future meeting?
Could I just come in briefly? So we took away the learning from Good Growth and have applied this across my directorate too. So in terms of that kind of structured approach, we have an open process to strategy and communications where people bring specific training needs, particularly where they require funding. So this is on top of the performance discussions that happen and identifying those training needs. And actually it has worked incredibly well. Within that as well, we actually monitor who it is that is requesting the training to make sure that there is fairness and equity across the piece. So often you'll get senior people because they might have very, very specific needs, but actually we cannot forget all people within the organisation. So we absolutely track that as well. And I know that this, learning from good growth, I know other directorates are following suit. So we learnt this very much from our staff survey results, which, as we know, and also from the exit interviews, that actually there is more that we absolutely need to do in this space.
And I just don't want to prolong it, but are we looking at that from a class and ethnicity angle as well as on this fairness of and equity of provision?
So I look at it in terms of all the grades. So it's and hoping that some of the socio-economic kind of intersectionality points are picked up within that. But this is right across the grades.
And we certainly do look at ethnicity as part of that as well.
Fair access to development. Assembly Member Prizzi is at the core of this, isn't it? And I'm very happy to come back and talk to the committee on another occasion about a much more structured approach to learning and development, as well as expectations of people to take personal responsibility for learning and development as well. And that's all part of what we're trying to achieve.
Okay, well, that might be something that we want to pick up on, given that we are keen to be very clear about exactly how staff have those opportunities once in the building at whatever grade they start to progress. But in the meantime, today, focusing in on today, and we've got about 10 questions, Assembly members, in this section that we hope to finish 10 minutes ago. I'll just mention that. I'm going to move on to Assembly Member Caroline Pidgeon, who's going to ask some questions about the HR shared service and a number of other matters.
Lovely, thank you very much. I'm going to try and condense my questions because I've clocked the time already. I'm guessing maybe to you, Mary or Shakira, what impact will the move to the HR shared service have on the workforce report in terms of your ability to analyse, drill down and so on? And also, what's your assessment so far of the move to this HR shared service?
So I think it's a positive move. I think that the types of reports that we will be able to have and be able to manipulate, be able to see, is going to be far more advanced than what we are working with currently. And I'm quite excited for that, actually. The way we'll be able to kind of, have experts who are in TFL that will be able to help manipulate that data. We should receive, the level of reporting that I don't think this organisation has quite seen. So I'm quite excited for that, and definitely have the quality of the report, workforce reports going forward. In terms of the second half of your question of how it's gone far, it's for me it's been good because it's done. We have done that hurdle, and we've moved over.
Delivery issues.
There are some delivery issues, but equally, this is all new as well to everyone in this organisation. I have recognised that I cannot underestimate the learning of having someone sat in HR that is that person's go-to to go and fix something, do something, complete a form, to now having to automate that process, someone having to log in, find the login, and be able to get onto the system in order to do something for themselves that is self-service. So I think there is that gap that we still need to kind of fix and sort and make sure that people understand with support from the team.
So are you providing training? What are you doing? Because obviously it's a big step and there are clearly some concerns.
Yeah, so there's been lots of, before we moved, there's been lots of training, there's lots of drop-in sessions, there's lots of explanation of actually the people function that's retained within the GLA, and then the kind of shared service piece and how they two link together. But that's all well and good until something happens, to be honest. Yeah. And it's when it happens, that's when people then think, what do I do now? Yeah. So we are doing a lot more kind of one-to-one of supporting people so that they'll come to us once to be able to do something, but then they know how to do things moving forward. So absolutely, it's been we've had some teething issues, no doubt about that, but the benefits it will reap moving forward in terms of the way we do our business, reporting and interrogation of data, we'll hopefully see the benefits of soon.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And then let's pick up just the issue of turnover. Obviously, turnover is healthy in any organisation. It's really important. But turnover has increased by 4% in the last year. Are you concerned about that? Why do you think that is? And in particular, when you look, there's a particular high turnover in the Assembly Secretariat and Mayor's Office. What do you think's driving that? Do you want to take that, Mary?
I think, so we're not concerned about our current level of turnover. I mean, we don't like it when good people leave us, of course not, but, you know, at the 14% level, that doesn't feel unreasonable or out of whack. I'm trying to recall, Assemblymember Pigeon, why that might have increased. Of course, we were coming out of COVID times a year ago, so I think we know that our churn level everywhere dropped during COVID. So we're not worried about an increase in turnover at this table. I'll need to just go and check back what you're referring to, but I think that will be linked to the sort of coming out of COVID times when everyone's stuck in the job that they had. So that's what I would just say about churn.
Anything you want to comment on the Assembly Secretariat and Mayoral office, where there seems to be continued high turnover? Whether you're, I mean, obviously with your new reporting, you'll be able to drill down and analyse that more. Are you going to do some work on that in particular?
So we will be able to drill down in much more in real time, because that's the other thing we haven't really spoken about. We're going to have some live access to data through our new arrangements as well, which will be very helpful to us. I mean, I think most people here probably understand why the Assembly turnover looks higher. We have been, we've had quite a lot of fixed-term appointments, so when people leave from a fixed-term post, it counts as a leaver. So some of that switch, some of the work, I mean, Zoe's gone now, but some of the work that Zoe and Helen are now doing, I think, will stabilise that. Mayor's Office, I think we need to leave others to comment on.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Okay. Susan, I think Assemblymember Hall, you wanted to come in here?
Yes, I did, please. We're talking about the Mayor's budget and the Assembly. The Assembly's budget has not increased in line with the Mayor's budget, and as such, the staff pay is not in line with it. So do you recognise that this might help retention with the Secretariat and help the quality of scrutiny and ultimately mayoral policy within the GLA? Should that be more aligned?
I think we need to make sure that the Assembly Secretariat roles are the right roles for the job that you all do in scrutiny, and that they are, you know, graded as they should be. You know, we're all constrained by the budget that we have got to work with. And I am hoping, again, this is a different conversation for a different time, but that through some of the work that Helen and Zoe are now doing around the scrutiny function and the Assembly Secretariat, we'll be able to think harder about roles and reward for those roles.
Okay, well, I'll come back to that. One very, very quick one. The going back to the first question, 101 increase of FTE posts in 6 months. You said a lot of that was paid from outside sources. So how much has the budget for the wages, if you like, gone up in 6 months? How much has our staffing cost extra in the 6 months?
I couldn't tell you that off the top of my head.
Can you send it to the committee?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
If we can have anything detailed like that sent to us, that would be great. Okay, thanks, Susan. I think it was Assemblymember Best who was next.
Yeah, thank you. Afternoon, Mary. What is the GLA doing to ensure it maintains a skilled workforce?
I think the short answer to that is a number of things, and colleagues can come in and support me on this. I mean, I think you said retained, didn't you?
Maintain.
Best, to maintain.
So,
okay.
Essentially.
Okay, so that's of course a factor of recruitment and of retention. I think quite a lot of what we have just talked about a more structured approach to career development is a big part of that, because as we've all commented on, we know from a number of sources that that's a big reason why people leave. We we try hard to make this a place where people want to come and work and are satisfied to be part of. And again, that's the role the staff surveys play in keeping us abreast of that. I think we are trying to build a better sense of the GLA sort of as an organisation as well. So colleagues Phil and Niran and Shakira working hard to build a sense of sort of team and spirit and purpose and connection between people and across teams. I think that all of that is important to maintain a skilled workforce. We're looking, as you know, at how our reward setup is structured. That's for a different conversation in a different place, but that too is part of the same piece of work.
Is it okay for me to come in? So I mean, obviously not as part of this data, because it's not something that we include in this data. But just to say that when we do put out, when we do have applicants, we have really good levels of applicants applying for most of our roles. One of the things that we do need to look at is where we sometimes have gaps, and that is something sometimes to do with kind of the market, and in particular areas such as digital and data, for instance, because the market in both, particularly in digital, is in terms of kind of the workforce that we have in the UK, that can often be quite difficult. But what I would say is that in terms of recent recruitment, I know that we have done in my area, and I know in other areas, we have had a really good level of excellent applicants that apply for our roles. So that the GLA continues to feel like a place that people do want to come. And the other thing I would say, and in fact Helen Ewan, who is the AD for the Assembly, recently did, is trying to also take a different approach to the way that we recruit. So in terms of our marketing and that sort of thing. And I know that she did a really big push when she recruited recently for the comms role within the Assembly Secretariat.
Thanks. And Mary, to come back to you, what actions is the GLA taking to address intersectional inequalities within its workforce?
So I think the honest answer to that is that we are not yet doing enough on intersectional inequalities. We are, and again we might come back to this in the next session, we are focusing in our new strategy primarily on addressing racial equality and disability equality and racial inclusion and disability inclusion. We absolutely are clear in that strategy that we need to understand intersectionality and inequality related to that far better than we do. But we have not really started tackling that. It comes back actually to Assembly Member Pidgeon's question about data, because our absolute expectations are, as we begin to receive the sort of key data sets from TfL as our new provider, we will be able to interrogate that much better than we currently can for intersectionality and inequality.
I think that does come close to an honest answer. I think the honest answer is nothing, right? Not much. It's nothing. It hasn't been looked at, and I think I raised that with you last year on intersectionality, and the reason I think it's important is because when you look at, for example, and I asked you last year about recruitment of men, for example, and the fact that there is 38% men in the organisation, would you look to recruit more men? The problem is, I don't think that you're very interested in that, because you're not looking at the intersectionality of it. And actually, there is a wider point there of why it might be important to try and recruit more men. Another thing that concerned me is you said that there's equal access to development opportunities.
That's what we need to achieve.
Okay, sorry. So do you want to achieve that? But in wanting to achieve that, when I was reading through the report, you said you're going to build a talent development programme for Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff. Then I look at the next paragraph, looking at those with disabilities, and they don't have that.
No, I think so the talent programme that we are going to be putting in place and sort of to really support accelerated development, so accelerated career development, we are going to ring fence 50% of the places on those programmes to both Black, Asian, minority, ethnic and disabled staff.
Okay, it doesn't say that in the report, so I think that would be good to
Yeah,
know.
well, that is definitely what we are doing. But if the report doesn't reflect that, we'll have to correct that.
Okay, and the other thing is to go back to that point we were talking about earlier with Lucinda around social class. There's obviously nothing in that in the data. I accept what we were talking about earlier. It's very hard to categorise that data. But the problem is when you start opening this box of worms of wanting to become a diverse workplace, that is so vitally important. So how are you trying to... You have no numbers of that. You have no understanding of that. And that is really one of the keys to diversity, that if you're not achieving that, then it's very hard to call yourself a diverse workplace.
So I agree, socio-economic status, class, or whatever label we put to it is really important. I mean, so I've got in front of me our Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Statement, which of course is something we've put in place in recent months, which is clear that we're talking about race, gender, religion, sexual orientation, age, disability and socio-economic background. But so far we have not done much as an organisation on that. We do now, in the staff survey, ask staff to answer some questions. The recognised set of questions around socio-economic background. But so far, across 2 surveys, we've had tiny take-up of those questions, which makes analysis difficult. But I mean, Assembly Member Best, understanding intersectionality and acting on inequality related to that, understanding socio-economic background and related inequality are absolutely what we want to do. But at the moment, I think one of our problems has been, and maybe we'll talk about this in the next session, we have spread ourselves too thinly in trying to achieve improvements in terms of workforce profile. So what we are currently saying for this year is that addressing racial equality, or improving racial equality, and disability equality in the GLA are our 2 top priorities. That's not to say we won't work on the others, but if we're going to make any steps forward, we have to focus ourselves, because otherwise we just don't move across the bigger agenda.
I will pass back to you, but I agree, but I think that's the very problem, is spreading yourself too thin, reducing people to numbers, not understanding the stories, and that's how you struggle to create a diverse workforce. And that's really my concern here, is that I don't think that you can achieve diversity whilst you see people as numbers. And to be honest, it comes back to the word the Chair used earlier. I think it's patronising to suggest that this is a better place to be a Black, Asian and ethnic minority because the percentage has gone up by 2%. I think it's a better place to work when we don't see reports like we're going to see after this. And I think all the rest of it is kind of just noise around that. It doesn't. 2% increase means nothing if it's not a good place to work, as we're going to see in the report later.
Yeah, well, I don't think of any of this as numbers. I think this is about people who work for us in the GLA, and I spend an awful lot of time talking directly to people who work here in the GLA, as I hope we will talk about in a minute. But I do stand by my sort of contention here is that we have to start. I think I have, and we have, put an absolutely new, sharp focus on improving the GLA as a place to work, whoever you are, and we can see some tangible improvements. We are unable to move forward across sort of this agenda equally, and we have made some choices about what to focus on first. That's for this year's inclusion programme. There'll be a refresh of that inclusion programme for 23-24, but that's where we've started.
I mean, I can see the somewhat sceptical face of Assembly Member Best. I think it would be fair. I'm interpreting here, so I might be wrong. I mean, I have some problem with that comment because, to me, trying to focus in on one area as if people only are one thing. You know, round the table in the Assembly, there are 25 of us, and between us, you know, many of us embody more than one thing. You know, we are sometimes female and LGBT, we are female and we are from a range of different ethnic backgrounds, we are female and we are disabled, we are, I mean, we embody many different things in one person. I can't personally stand the word intersectional, but I think we all know what it means, and what I've just described is human beings who are intersectional, because very few of us are completely one-dimensional and just one thing. However, I am just doing that as an intro into moving the questioning on to Assembly Member Russell, who is going to ask some specific questions about getting people used to the idea of working with other people and making it a comfortable working environment, whoever and whatever you are.
Thank you. So yes, my first question is about let's talk about race. The Equal Group found that some of the barriers that were faced by ethnic minority staff appeared to come from a lack of understanding, and called for better learning opportunities on EDI and anti-racism, starting with all staff completing Let's Talk About Race. And I think you increased the capacity and frequency of those sessions, and you've been monitoring it at CMT, and checking also with executive directors reasons for non-completion, and so you've really, it sounds like you've had a bit of a grip on that. So yes, how do you see that programme going, and how do you see it developing? Because there's going to presumably come a point where you've obviously got staff turnover, so you're never going to get to 100%, because people are always going to be coming new into the organisation. But you can get to a point where you're catching people as they come into the organisation, and everyone who is in the organisation has done Let's Talk About Race. But where does that go next? And at what point do you think you'll be at the point where basically everyone who's in the organisation has completed Let's Talk About Race, and so you're at a point of capturing the people coming into the organisation rather than people already here?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of thought about this as well, particularly in my function, and that's about actually what is the next iteration of that, and how does that become more sophisticated, and how does actually that then just embed and is part of the norm within the organisation, instead of having somebody go through this mandatory, for want of a better kind of phrasing, just kind of, you know, sheep opinion to kind of this kind of training. So there's something about how do we embed that within the organisation, how do we embed that through directorates, and actually how is this kind of a standard way in which we operate. There is something about, you know, how do we kind of have a next iteration of that, and that is how do we then open up more conversations so that people are more confident and building confidence in this topic area, which is really tough, really tough to do. But I think there is where we've had now kind of that basis, although we're never going to get to 100%, and we recognise that, but it's now part of a mandatory induction process, which we have a lot of focus on, so that we have inclusive induction and inclusive onboarding. There is something then kind of what is the next layer within the directors of the organisation of making sure that this is how we just do our business here. And that's something that we're kind of working on next, as the next step of that, so that actually we are capturing people as they come in, but equally as they land into the directorates, then how are they onboarded, and how do they then feel that? So not just develop a programme, but actually how does that feel as part of our wider culture within the organisation? So that's kind of our next steps of how we do that.
Can I just ask, I mean, it's clear that as the sort of senior leadership that you're really trying to get to grips with this. You can see there's a lot of strands of work. Would you say that are there throughout the staff in the GLA, are there groups of staff where you're seeing fewer people doing the Let's Talk About Race, and which groups are those?
Well, there were, but I think the push that we have, undertaken and the grip we've put to this has really changed that. Mm-hmm. As you said, we're at 77%. I don't think we will ever get to 100% just because of the churn. But we are now going to build this directly into probation, so we will pick everybody up as they come in. There are some people who don't want to do the sessions.
When you say some people, is that what sort of numbers are you talking about?
Niran and Phil can talk to their numbers in their directorates. It's small numbers, but again, part of getting the grip to this on this has been actually making sure that the right person talks to those people, and we understand entirely why they don't want to do it.
I think from experience in my directorate with regards to Let's Talk About Race, I think there have been some people who have been more uncomfortable with that conversation. I don't have specific numbers, but I would say anecdotally, and sort of my sense has been that's most often been white heterosexual men of about my age.
So people within the management structure?
No, not necessarily, but sometimes. But I mean, I think.
I'm just asking that because if there are people who are resistant to doing Let's Talk About Race, does that provide a risk to your managing to move the organisation forward?
I think it could have done, and I think it may do in pockets, but I think a lot of the work that we are doing at the moment around how we recruit into senior roles is making a really big difference. And the cohort of people that we have recruited over the past year looks very different into those sort of grade 10 plus roles than the people, in many cases, people who've left. I think there is a second group. I think to some degree with those people as well, there's a critical mass building up, and it is harder to resist. There is a second group which I have some sympathy for, who are Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff themselves, who ask the question about why it is their job to participate in these sessions and tell everyone about their experience. And we've done a lot of, we've also tried very hard to engage them. We've made sure that it's not just Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff who are running the sessions, and that they are comfortable that it is a proper conversation in all directions and not simply drawing upon their lived experience for other people's benefit. But I think where perhaps there is the clearest sense of what you're talking about, Assembly Member Russell, is when we look at where the active members of our staff networks come from. Mm-hmm. I think the staff networks are a really important part of this, and I think the staff networks are where we start to address, at a point when we're having to prioritise management time, where we start to address some of the intersectionality questions that Assembly Member Best has raised, and make sure that there's a broader conversation within the organisation. But the cohort of people who are really actively running those networks are very, very often drawn from, for want of a better way of putting it, the demographics that the networks represent, when actually we need a much broader group of people involved in those discussions. There has been a big step forward, a useful step forward, with the establishment of what's called the All-In Network, which is about, to use a bit of a cliche, allyship. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a step forward, but really encouraging people across the organisation to become active in those networks, I think is going to be important going forward. And that's reflected in the mandatory EDI objectives that we have set for everyone across the organisation, that really draw out participation in and engagement with the networks as an important way in which we can drive that kind of inclusive culture within the organisation.
So presumably, if this is mandatory to participate, then no one would be being appointed to kind of more senior roles if they have not done this work. Is that the case?
Can I just come in and say that there is, alongside Let's Talk About Race, which is just one element, and it's absolutely a mandatory element, is the fact that we do have EDI objectives, both for managers and also for staff. So those objectives are there. And the one thing I want to just say, and this goes to this intersectionality point, we have a huge richness in this organisation. I have never worked in an organisation like it, where in particular, not just from this group here, but also from the staff networks, who are just an incredible group of people, and the events and some of the richness in the events that they put on is just phenomenal. And one of the things that we've done, certainly around the EDI objectives, is to ensure and encourage that people attend those events, regardless of kind of what their protected characteristic or their background is, because we need to build that education piece right across a number of areas.
Mary, did you want to?
Well, I wanted to just come back to your question, which was, slightly paraphrasing, but if somebody doesn't do Let's Talk About Race training, will they be promoted? I think that's partly what you were asking. That's what you were asking. So, we haven't got a position where we say no, you won't be. But we, as Phil said, we are being increasingly careful on who we recruit into this organisation, and we, in terms of their values and their personal position on equality, diversity and inclusion. And we will have to, at some point, make it clear that if there are things that staff aren't prepared to do in terms of meeting their objectives, which Niran has just spoken about, or that managers aren't prepared to do in meeting their objectives, if people aren't prepared to do those and those objectives go with the job, well, then that takes you down that path eventually. Because we just need, if we're going to change the culture, who we recruit and who we promote are absolutely key.
And while we don't have a box to tick in the recruitment process that says, have you done Let's Talk About Race, we do have an absolute requirement that every interview includes a question focused on equality, diversity and inclusion, so that we can test exactly as Mary says, the values and the commitment of candidates to that. And that is scored in just the same way as the other questions and can be a reason why someone doesn't get the job.
I do think it's really important in terms of building that trust and confidence across the organisation. But I just wondered if I could just bring in, I know, Solomon, you're not meant to be on this panel, you're on the second panel, but do you have anything you'd just like to comment on this bit?
Yeah, it's fine. I think the main thing is our position has always been, so we were the network that said that we should roll out Let's Talk About Race. I think I gave an example to someone that a long time ago I studied French politics. If I wanted to go and work in France, I would need to speak French, and that would be a competency in my job. I think if you want to work in London and work for London's government, you need to be competent and comfortable talking about race, because you're representing the most diverse city in the world. I think I did want to touch on Phil's point that I think a lot of our members have questioned whether they should be going to sessions or whether they should be involved. But I think most of them have ended up going, have participated, and credit to a lot of our white staff at the GLA who have put themselves forward and facilitated those sessions. I don't think it's the be-all and end-all. Let's talk about race, but it's an okay start. And presumably, if we're at 77%, most people here have also done it and would agree that it was a good thing to do. But I don't know how many people did do it.
Well, actually, I was going to say I don't think Assembly members have been have had an invitation, unless it's so. Maybe we should be as part of the organisation. We should be be getting involved in that too.
Yeah,
You'll be
Chair,
very welcome.
Thank you. Chair, the next two questions, which are about, losing my place here, pay gaps and also the sustaining the increase in the number of black, Asian and ethnic minority staff, I think, have been covered in other people's questions. So I'll hand back to you, because that took rather longer than I'd anticipated.
Thank you. And I think Assembly Member Susan Hall had a couple of points she wanted to raise, but maybe you're going to ask her answers in writing.
I've got lots and lots of points,
Okay.
but just a couple now. Mary, if we're talk about race training, which are the worst directorates?
Get that in writing. Completion.
No, I think we'd like to hear.
Yes, I haven't got the latest completion rates in front of me, but we can
Okay,
share them.
I'll tell you what.
But I think my point
we've
was
looked up, and it's your office and the Mayor's office. The Mayor's office is worst, then yours, then resources, then the Assembly Secretariat. Although I believe all my staff in my office have done it.
Well, if those are the numbers that you've got, I don't know how up to date those numbers are, but
Okay, well, I'll leave that with you. If that is the correct numbers, that really isn't very good, is it? No, is the answer. It's really not very good.
I'd like to get the actual up to date numbers in front of me, and then I'm prepared to stand by what those numbers are.
Well, then perhaps you'll send them to us. Just a very couple of quick points. I've got lots of really important points which we haven't got time to go through. I just want to point out that London's working age population is 17% disabled, whereas the GLA's workforce is 7%. I want to know how that's being addressed, because I think that is really bad. And the other thing is, what budget does the GLA allocate to EDI? You must know that as we're talking about this.
So on the point about disabled staff, I have suggested in my report for the next item that we bring back we have a proper session on disability.
I'm happy with that.
So
And I've got lots of other questions which the chair has said that I can send in and you will answer. Okay. But you must know what is the budget that goes.
Our budget this year for EDI activity is £220,000, which is on top of the cost of the EDI team of 4 people. And then in the draft budget, which Budget and Performance Committee saw a few days ago, we are looking for a budget of £700,000 in 23-24 and 24-25.
So the 220k for events then, and plus.
No, it's not for events. It's for all the work we're doing around diverse recruitment, progression, development, accelerated development in particular communities.
So does that include the cost of wages for those 4 staff?
No, that will be on top.
Which would be?
Would be about another 200,000.
Okay, lovely, thank you. I'll send them in, Chair, because I know how busy we are.
Okay, thank you. I think Joanne McCartney wanted to come in. Member McCartney.
Yes, and it's a question to Mary. Looking at the workforce figures, it's actually the Assembly that's got the lowest percentage of black, Asian and ethnic minority staff by directorate at only 13%. Can I just ask what actions are being taken about that? And we can have a more detailed response perhaps in writing, but that's something that I think all of us are very concerned about.
Yes, so each executive director is tasked directly by me to improve the position in each of the directorates. So Helen, not here today, but Helen is no different to that. She, as Niran has already said, is trying to take some new approaches to recruitment to try and change that position. She is committed to it and determined to do it. And she will be using all the sort of tools that the rest of us are doing, using in our directorate, and will be supported by Shakira's team in doing so.
Obviously, some directorates are better than others. Are we actually sharing that learning across the organisation?
Yes.
Okay. And it would be good, actually, I think, Chair, if we could have some examples of good practice where it's worked.
If those could be provided afterwards, I think that would be really helpful. Are you okay? Thank you. Thank you very much. Do you wanted to come in on one more?
Really quickly, could you? I think Phil mentioned that every interview has to have an EDI question, and I'd really want to see an example of what those are, because I couldn't help but think I've met lots of people in my life who are raging homophobes, but also race equality campaigners, and conversely, the same on the other side. So I just want to know how you're capturing that being a good question that shows people's nature.
Are you confirming that you are?
Yes, we could provide some.
Yes.
Because we have taken care with the questions.
Good. Okay, I'm going to thank the panel for their responses. This is the end of the first part of this discussion. I'm therefore going to... Oh, did you want to come in as well? Sorry, yes. Okay.
Chair. Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, going back to the issue of promotion and the Let's Talk About Race sessions not being a requirement for promotion, can you explain why that is? Why isn't that a requirement? Because to me it seems as if that's a really good way of establishing commitment to the issue. So what stops you from making it a requirement?
I think we've got a lot to do, and we've tried to begin to sort of put the sort of basic building blocks in place here. Around diverse recruitment, inclusive training, getting people to go to Let's Talk About Race, because we're doing very well now in take up, but it was a slow start, and it really took us as the senior leadership team to actually say to people, there's no choice here, you're going to do this. So that's where we've started. I think, as I was saying to Assembly Member Russell, I think we are absolutely now in the position where we are beginning to start to make clear what are our expectations of staff in the GLA when it comes to these matters. And so our objectives for this year, first time we've set every member of staff an objective around equality, diversity and inclusion. And in fact, I think the Equal Group said that was one of their recommendations, but also said don't try and do too much with those objectives in the first instance. Start building up from something quite basic. And so this next piece about what you have to do or not to do to secure promotion is absolutely where we're going next. But our first start was to get the right programme designed. And then get people to it. So I'm not saying that may well be part of where we go in the future.
Okay, I think I'm going to leave it there because we really are running terribly behind time. But I think we're all slightly confused as to why, if a training course that's so important is mandatory for all staff, why you can't make attending that course something that you must have done before you apply for a promotion or get one. I can't see why those two things can't be joined together. I am very briefly going to adjourn, and I'd like to say thank you to Shakira, Keddo and Phil Graham, who are going to be leaving us, and then we'll be moving on with the second panel. Just a couple of minutes. Okay, I'm going to reconvene, and this is the second panel. And obviously we've already welcomed Mary Harpley, our Chief Officer, and Niran Mothada, who's our Executive Director of Strategy and Communications. Now, Solomon Curtis, who's one of the co-chairs of the Race Equality Network, appeared amongst the previous panel. Thank you very much for allowing Caroline to suddenly bring you in to answer some questions. I believe we're also having Letitia Cameron, I think possibly online. Yes, she's just appeared. Hi, Letitia. And in addition, unfortunately, Mac Allange can't be with us today, but we've got Alan Reid from the Equal Group. I think I've done that the right way round and sent the apologies from the correct person. So that's our second panel, which I'm very proud to say includes an element of recycling. Being a sustainability obsessive. So we're going to start with a question, if we may, from me to Alan Reid. So I'll just alert Alan by saying that out loud. Alan, given the GLA's standing as an inclusive employer, such as ranking 30th in Stonewall's top 100 employers, were you surprised by the findings of your review of the organisation when you carried it out? I'm going to remind you to unmute yourself, just in case.
Letitia's just messaged me to say she can't hear. Oh, so I'm not sure if Alan can hear.
I think Alan can't hear either. No, he can't. Is the screen on mute somehow? We're all on mute. We're on mute, as far as he's concerned. Are we not being webcast at the moment? I adjourned, so maybe we're still adjourned as far as the web. I did, yeah. Adjourn again. Do you want me to do it again? Yeah, perhaps adjourn. Okay. Very low. Can you hear us now? The circle of doom has gone around the picture of the assembly. Alan, can you hear us?
Yes.
You can. Excellent. That's very good. I said I'm going to ask my first question to Alan Reid. I don't know if you heard any of the introductions as to who the other participants are, but I'm not going to go through that because I think they were included on the webcast. And my question to you was, given the GLA's standing as an inclusive employer, such as ranking 30th in Stonewall's top 100 employers, were you surprised by the findings of your review when you carried it out this year?
Unfortunately, no. But I'm really surprised by the findings. I tend to go quite deep with a lot of organisations, and I think I went really deep with the GLA. And I don't think it was actually a surprise to many people within the GLA. I think it was sort of bubbling under the surface, and this work was them recognising that it was there and needed to be exposed. So based on what the contract does for, no, I wasn't that surprised.
Okay, well that's interesting. So scratching below the surface and really asking those intensive questions, it didn't surprise you despite the sort of the external badges that have been supplied, if you like. Is that common? Is that common? Would you say that's common then?
I think it's a lot more common than people are comfortable with. I think with my sector, it's still an emerging sector. There's not a lot of structure around, and we're trying to change that, and we're trying to embed structure in a lot of places. But that means that there's a lot of companies who have been doing really good work, but they're being measured maybe on surface level issues. So they're getting awards for good work, but they're missing the bigger issues that are hiding underneath. Things like systemic racism, people don't want to see. So unless you ask the questions that expose it, you're not going to see it. And I think with a lot of the badges that companies like the GLA and other organisations have had, people maybe aren't asking those tough questions that I tend to ask.
So it sounds as though it's something that's sort of relatively common. How does the GLA compare to other organisations in terms of the number of recommendations that you made? Would you say that we're sort of at the top or the bottom of needing to address these matters, if it's something that a lot of organisations are needing to do? Where are we compared to them?
So I'm not a big proponent of benchmarking. I think if you try and benchmark yourself against another company, you're either going to give yourself too many pats in the back because you're doing better than them, or you're going to struggle really hard to achieve what they're doing when that's maybe not the same goals as you should have. I think the GLA has to compare themselves against themselves. In terms of recommendations I gave out, I wouldn't say they're anywhere worse than some of the other companies I've done recommendations for. When people come to the Equal Group, it tends to be because they need that deep dive. So, yeah, I think they're around about that average mark for where I'm usually working.
Okay, I guess the point that I was trying to sort of dig into there is more about whether or not the GLA was in some way an outlier. But it's, I can understand your point about don't let yourself be distracted into wanting to sort of benchmark yourself against others. But it sounds as though what you're saying is that where companies have gone into this deep dive, that we are in there. We're not an outlier. 100 times worse than everyone else, or something like that. Really, I was just a general response. I
genuinely think, even though I made 42 recommendations that break down into some really specific actions, I actually think even when I did that review for the GLA, they were probably ahead of the curve in terms of equality work.
Okay, I'm going to turn to Solomon and Letitia, if I may. What was, and I'll start with Solomon first, because you're in the room and you've already done a question, and Letitia, I'll then bring you in afterwards. What was your reaction when you saw the finding and the 42 recommendations from the Equal Group's independent review of the GLA?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, my reaction was not one of surprise. As chair of or co-chair of the Race Equity Network, we are privy to stories and conversations from staff and members that, that obviously a lot of them that we'll never share. And I think this report was an important part of some of those stories coming out. I think I was surprised at the number of recommendations, because I do think that the GLA as an organisation gets quite quick into kind of action planning, and some people might call it bureaucracy, and I think there were a lot of recommendations.
Bureaucracy here, good.
But I think actually what was more, what was more important were the kind of overarching categories underpinning the recommendations, because actually I think it's a really tough ask to ask the GLA to deliver on those 42 recommendations, and I appreciated that some of them were prioritised, and I think the GLA internally has prioritised the ones that it thinks are important. But I think overall, I think the network were genuinely very pleased that the review was commissioned. I think that's actually a brave move for an organisation to commission an independent review into itself. And I sat on the recruitment panel with Mary when we appointed the Equal Group, and felt that actually, the brief that was given to them was a very honest brief, and genuinely felt that Mary is personally very committed to this agenda in a way that we probably haven't seen in the organisation before. The important bit, which I'm sure we'll get onto later, is what are the results from this? But they were the kind of initial reactions.
Sure. Letitia, do you share Solomon's view that it was pleasing to have the report done, and it was actually no surprise, really, to see what was in it?
Yeah, most definitely, but I'm relatively new to the GLA, so historically I have no real understanding, but based on feedback and such, I would say that I definitely agree with Solomon's view.
Thank you. Mary, would you say that sufficient progress has been made on the recommendations from the independent review since it was published back in March? I mean, clearly 42 recommendations. I think we're all acknowledging that there's a lot that needs to be done. I'm not expecting you to say, yes, we've addressed all 42, because, it is only that number of months, but has progress started? And can you give me any evidence, some idea of, what's been moving forward?
Thank you. So I think we have made good progress in beginning to tackle, as everyone's saying, a substantial set of recommendations. We have gone with the Equal Group's prioritisation of the recommendations, because they did a lot of work on that, and really said, okay, well, the ones that are in absolute immediate term we must tackle now, and some of the ones that are 6 to 12 months time we must get on with now. So we have put a huge amount of effort into it, and in terms of a little bit of sort of evidence for that, we very quickly had a new EDI statement. I say new statement, the GLA's first EDI statement. By July, we had our new EDI strategy, We Belong Here. And very soon after that, by September, we had a sort of full action plan for the first year of that strategy. And again, we've given that to you as part of this. We focused very hard on recruitment very quickly. Again, absolutely taking what Alan and Mac had told us. We focused on some of the things we've spoken about already, making sure that we absolutely are clear on the diversity of our recruitment process all the way through, in terms of not only candidates at each stage, but also panels. We put in some real work around our competency framework, which hadn't been looked at for years. Equal Group were clear that was a barrier to recruitment and progression, and we have done some work to refresh that. We will be using that new framework from January. We've put in this absolute oversight now, senior oversight of all recruitment at grade 10 and above. That went in almost immediately, and I am in no doubt that that is helping drive some of the recruitment outcomes we talked about earlier. We've done a lot around EDI learning. There is much more to do. We've focused on participation in Let's Talk About Race, which we have talked about, but we've refreshed what we call our GLA Leadership Forum, which is our top 200 officers, the GLA, who now meet quarterly on EDI business, and that is making a difference as well. Another big theme coming out of the report, the independent review, was accountability. You know, who is accountable for making these improvements and making this organisation the organisation it should be? And again, we've talked about these new objectives for all staff and all managers. Those came out very quickly. I hold, I've only got Niran left now, but I hold all my executive directors to account. We are holding the organisation to account through some of the EDI essentials, other things you've seen in the report. We've focused very quickly on that. And we are moving towards a much more active consideration of what type of culture do we want in this organisation. Again, we've touched on that already. So your question, Chair, was, has sufficient progress been made? I truly believe we have made the progress that was possible in the months that we have had. Others may have other views on that. We have focused on it in a way we've never focused on it before. There is always more to do. We're going as fast as we can. We've talked about some of the areas today that we haven't got to yet. But my job now, as I see it, is to absolutely keep our foot on the pedal and absolutely keep momentum and the pace behind this, because it's got to become sustainable. And you know, we've got another we've got a action plan for 22-23, which is the first year of our 3-year strategy. Lots of people keep saying to me, well, why does it run out in March? Because it doesn't run out in March. We will refresh it for the next year. But I felt very strongly that we should be really clear, what are we going to be doing in this first 12 months? There's not very much that the Equal Group suggested we needed to do in the first 12 months, in the first 6 months, that we haven't done. I think I feel very confident about the first 6 months. There are some things that they suggest we must do in the first 12 months. Well, we're 3 months off the first 12 months, and we've still got some work to do on some of those. But I do think we have made a very committed, determined start to delivering these recommendations.
I mean, I think we've agreed that this committee will review the progress every 6 months, so we'll be asking probably almost exactly the same question in 6 months' time, and we'll be digging in to sort of see whether, you know, we've got comments on the progress that's being made. I assume that you are also accountable to the Mayor for delivering these changes. How's that accountability being pursued by him and the mayoral team?
In regular conversations about progress and what else I have planned in terms of keeping this momentum going and just keeping pushing forward, because, as you know, the goalposts change too, don't they? So the latest census for London shows a different population profile to the one that I have been seeking to match here in the organisation. So to some extent, this job is never quite going to be done. But as I say to staff, and Niran and Solomon have heard me say this many times, this is one of my absolute top objectives from the Mayor.
Okay, now I'm very tempted to come back to Solomon and Letitia and ask them what they think of progress, but I'm actually going to pass over to my colleague, Assemblymember McCartney, who I'm certain might ask that amongst other things. Oh, Dr. Sahota. We're actually rehoming a question because Assemblymember Russell is out of the room for about half an hour, so that's why I'm slightly confusing Dr. Sahota with Assemblymember McCartney.
Easily done. Thank you, Chair. Mary, this is for you. 42 recommendations, I think, were made to you. And what I found surprising was that you accepted some recommendations which were already meant to be GLA policies. For example, on main blind recruitment, diverse recruitment panels, and staff ED objectives. Why would you accept recommendations which are already GLA policies?
Because the deep dive review that Alan did showed that even though those were policies, they were not being implemented consistently across the organisation. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't going to argue with a recommendation when the report tells me, actually, your policy might be diverse panels, but we can tell you that all your panels aren't diverse. So it was about, this is about, isn't just about the policy, is it? This is about making this all real.
Okay.
So that's why I accepted those.
Great. Well, thank you. At least it shows the insight. Something which, of course, the chair was going to do, and I am going to do now, which is go to Solomon and Letitia. Do you feel that sufficient action has been taken, or is being taken, in response to the review?
So, I think we shouldn't question. This is why I said I was, pleasantly surprised about Mary's commitment to this work. I think there's two things here. One is it's kind of the age-old question of de jure and de facto. So what we're talking about is, we can have all our policies in place, but the test is, is that having the impact on the ground? And I think the main thing that came out from the independent review, which worried us as a network, was actually the level of manager discretion in the organisation, how managers were using their discretion if you want to take it literally, with the Equalities Act in a kind of illegal way, so to speak, because you're disproportionately affecting certain staff. And so I think that's an area of the review that we want to keep high up the agenda, because I think that's important in other change programmes. When we look at the pay and grading review, and we look at the link between reward and recognition and manager discretion, we need to remember there's a thread here that's one of the fundamental issues in the organisation. I think staff, and I don't want to speak for staff, but I think the message we've been getting, and I hope Letitia would agree with this, is there is a sense of apathy, because some of these issues are historic, and therefore if you were to ask many staff, has sufficient progress been made, there is a context of, well, we've been saying these issues have been going on for a long time, so they're not going to feel sufficient progress has been made because they feel they've been facing these issues for longer than they should have. But if we now separate historic staff from new staff, what I would say is that staff that have come into the organisation over the last 6 months have a very different view of the organisation, and I think would feel that the organisation is taking this work seriously, has made progress on this since the independent review was published, and therefore, I think if we talk about the first 6 months, I think we're pretty happy with the progress that's been made. But we would go back to the 4 asks that the network made to the organisation, and the deadline that we set for those 4 asks, which was February 2024. And so actually for us, the big challenge on progress is, does the ethnicity pay gap move from 11.1% to 0% in just over a year's time? Because that's what we asked the organisation to do. Do we move up from 77% of Let's Talk About Race? And do we see a talent development programme in place that's seeing progression of particularly black staff, but black, Asian, minority ethnic? So that's the real test for us. Sorry if it doesn't answer the question.
I think it's a very pragmatic, sensible answer. Letitia, do you want to add anything?
I guess Solomon didn't leave me much to say, to be honest with you. But I guess one thing that I can highlight, that one of our asks were to make sure that the GLA staff profile was reflective of London's demography, and I think the workforce report highlights that is such the case when it comes to black staff intake. However, a little bit more work does need to be done in terms of Asian and British Asian staff.
Well, thank you. Look, this is all very promising, and as the chair said, we'll be reviewing it in 6 months' time. Thank you.
We may well be reviewing it against the Race Equality Network's 4 tests, amongst other things. However, I'm now going to pass on to Assembly Member Susan Hall, who's going to ask some further questions.
Yes, thank you. These are to you, Mary. Mary, I really don't doubt that your commitment is there. It's more that I'm concerned that there's an awful lot of bureaucracy or box ticking, and often there's an incorrect perception that the more money you throw at something, it'll fix it. And I've always had the view that actually that isn't always the case. you know, and very often we see this in all sorts of different areas. And this is so much deeper than that, and therefore those are my specific worries. But Mary, how does the inclusion programme address the equal group's findings that there is a lack of dedicated focus or accountability around equality, diversity and inclusion at the GLA?
So, I mean, this is an area that we have focused on, and I will leave Niran to perhaps talk a little bit about what it feels like to be held accountable now for this, because I think what we have said is, on the one hand, everybody at the GLA is accountable for getting us to be a truly inclusive organisation, which is why we've got these new objectives for all staff. Managers have obviously a different but absolutely critical role, and they've got their own set of objectives. But I think the shift I have made in response to the Equal Groups report is to say, actually, I need to be, you know, I'm committed to this, as you say, Assembly Member Hall. My corporate management team are committed to this. But they are the ones sitting on top of these teams, and they are the ones who need to be providing me evidence that these changes are happening. And that, you know, the policies that we have got, many of which the Equal Group were relatively happy with, are actually being implemented. And that is absolutely new. We didn't have this before February. And that is a sort of, and that isn't a tick box exercise. It's what I'm trying to do is be really actually quite forensic and diligent about making sure that what I am being told is happening. And then before Niran talks, I'm trying to wrap that round as well then with talking directly to staff and hearing directly from our staff across the GLA, that asking them the question, is what I am trying to do here in response to this report making a difference to your experience in the GLA? And so this has seen the creation of these meetings, which we've called Our Moment, which are opportunities for staff to come and talk directly to me. And we've had 3 of those so far, September, November and December, and those are now monthly. And those 2 are turning into sessions where I think people are increasingly prepared to speak very honestly, sometimes positively, sometimes not, about the difference that this programme is making. So I think all of those are part of the accountability piece.
So they're the mechanisms you're using, particularly with middle managers, to make sure they demonstrate the EDI.
Yeah. Can I? Is it okay for me to come in?
Yes, of course.
Assembly Member Paul. So just to say, having been through a challenge session, it was incredibly uncomfortable, which is exactly where it should be. And I went into that challenge session with my assistant directors. We looked at both our EDI essentials, which are in the pack alongside our action plan, and there is something about the assurance piece, as Assembly Member Sahota discussed before, and absolutely being assured that what we say will happen is happening right the way down through the organisation. And I think the other challenge, which I think is absolutely critical, I think to all of us, you know, we're not, I mean, I know we've talked about workforce data before, but we're not like a huge organisation of thousands of people. And there is something about us and also our managers and our senior managers.
We will be soon.
And
Mary's working on the numbers.
And our senior managers, who actually know our staff, because that's absolutely critical, and we know and understand the experience of all the people that work for us, and that's got to be a really important part of what we're trying to do.
Okay, so how are you assisting middle managers in providing tangible and measurable ways to meet the EDI objectives when the action plan in its current form makes it difficult for the reader to easily access the progress that is being made?
So one of the things that we have within each of our directorates is taking the main action plan and actually focusing in and based on the priorities and focusing in on specific actions that we need to drive through our directorate. All our directorates are quite different in terms of makeup as well. So actually it is working both to the action plan that we have here. We communicate that on a frequent basis. That appears on our intranet site, including the progress that we make against it. But actually, it's about chunking it down into kind of tangible actions that they can take themselves. And there is a prioritisation around that. And some of the EDI essentials that you see here in one of the annexes, that actually helps us as well because we're focused on a wave of activity, and then there'll be more activity to come.
You see, the middle managers have got to know that if they're really trying hard, they've got to know that they're doing well. So the action plan includes a column titled, "How are we measuring progress?" But most of the actions don't include a specific metric. Similarly, whilst there is a status column, this does not include a RAG rating. And though many of the actions appear to be overdue, the action plan does not clearly or explicitly state that. So what is the point of having an action plan if you can't measure progress? I mean, that does need to be remedied, doesn't it? Because if we want to enthuse middle managers, and we absolutely must, especially when you're telling me that new recruits from Bain Groups, etc., are coming in at apprenticeship level, we want to make sure that they can climb up the ladder and improve. And middle managers that are really desperate to make sure that they get this right have got to be given the tools to see that they're doing the right thing. And I would suggest this isn't that is a fault with that. And we must find ways that they can think, yes, my actions are making a difference, because that's what they want.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. We talked about learning and development with Assemblymember Prince earlier, didn't we? And needing a much more sort of structured approach to that. And what we are beginning to do now is to say, actually, this is what we expect of a manager. This is what we expect of a senior manager. And in terms of responsibility for development of their staff, responsibility for supporting any of the staff who have disabilities, for example, also really understanding people's aspirations and where people want to try and get to, because again, that's part of what comes through the report. People don't always feel they've got equal access to those types of discussions. And so that is, I think we've laid the groundwork, Assemblymember Hall, for some of that. Getting much clearer now on what we expect of managers. And to your point, how we will assess that is absolutely where we need to go next. And some of that we came into, what will have to be true for you to get promoted to a manager is part of that same discussion.
Well, it's how they can assess it as well.
Yes,
how does a middle
themselves?
manager know they're doing the right thing and getting it right, and getting enthused by getting it right? So, and that's got to be put in there, because if they're thinking I'm making a difference, then that's great. They'll carry on. That's what we want.
Absolutely, and also so picking up on that point, there is, all managers are managed by somebody, right? So there is something in there about. So we have the EDI objectives set out sort of quite clearly for managers, but there is something in that kind of performance discussion that they have with their own managers around kind of what is being achieved, how it's being achieved, and also celebrating some of that success, because we do need to celebrate it. Because you're absolutely right, we do need to enthuse people, and particularly where people are really making progress in this space. And the other thing I would say is that tools, you talked about tools and kind of the information that managers need. That in itself is absolutely critical. So, for instance, around workplace adjustments, which is an absolute key thing in terms of accessibility and accessibility for everybody in the workplace. We have recently rolled out, in my directorate, and it's being rolled out elsewhere, is specific training for managers about those conversations and how to have those conversations, because sometimes those conversations can be quite difficult, and we need to recognise that. So it's about providing that support to managers so they can carry out the work that we absolutely need them to do. They are critical to us.
Yeah, but I won't go on about it. I would be grateful if you looked at what I just said about the action plan and fix that, because it goes back again to throwing money at lots of things. Get action plans right. Work out how to enthuse managers to get it right, because the majority of them want to. Those that don't shouldn't be there. And it's giving everybody a boost that it's getting right. So, Mary, how can you demonstrate to this committee that the GLA's current complaint system encourages a culture of openness and trust, that complaints will be taken seriously? And we only need to look at the fire brigade and the police at the moment to how things go wrong. So what can you tell to me that you've sorted out a complaint system when anybody can go to it without fear?
I think the thing, it's a shame Shakira's gone. I mean, she wasn't going to be on this panel, but she is doing some work in her new structure to make sure that the way particularly we receive any complaints around bullying and harassment in particular, and again this comes from the Equal Group's recommendations, are handled by a central specialist resource in her team, to make sure that those are then absolutely dealt with as they should be. They used to get go in slightly different routes, complaints, but because we've moved quite a lot of our HR team and functions into TfL, of course, we've had to rethink how we deal with complaints. So as part of that new structure, we have rethought where in the organisation those complaints go to. I don't think we believe we have an issue with how the complaints are dealt with, but of course you never know who's not complaining because they don't feel they can trust the system.
Yeah.
So that is absolutely the piece that Shakira is working on in her new structure.
Okay, one quick question, and before I go on to, I just want to say I saw Solomon. Two of my colleagues have gone. If they don't get their train, they cannot get home. It's not that they don't think this is important, because every member thinks this is important. So that's why they've gone. Just the last question. What is the GLA doing to ensure that staff from all the protected characteristics are supported through the inclusion programme?
So, in fact, the Equal Group report starts, I think, in the first or second paragraph, says something along the lines of, we've looked at race in the GLA because that's what we've been asked to do, but actually much of what we say here applies to other groups and other groups of protected characteristics. And that's the approach we've taken in our inclusion programme. So even though I have said, and we are focusing on race and disability in particular, we're still continuing our work with all the networks, which of course cover Women's Network, the Disability Network, LGBTQ plus network, all the other networks. Our work with those networks continues. Our work, for example, to submit another entry into the Stonewall Equality Employer Index, that continues. We'll be making a submission at the end of this year to that. We continue to work on some other areas that we know are important. So having said we're focusing, we are also trying to keep the programme relevant to as many staff with protected characteristics as we can.
And and in addition, I would say that each network has one of us as a senior sponsor. We work really closely with the network chairs. I've just stepped away from the Race Equity Network and now I'm working on LGBTQ+. But that is another channel in which we can ensure that not just their members, but those within those communities also have somewhere they can go where issues need to be raised or things are happening that perhaps we're not aware of. And then the other thing I would say is the Our Moment forums, which within the recommendations was for our Black, Asian, minority, ethnic staff. We have actually opened to everyone in the organisation because we feel it's really important that those forums where people can come and they can have time to talk openly in a safe space are open to everybody in the organisation.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that. The more we all work together,
Absolutely.
the better everything's got to be. I'm going to take my colleagues a couple of questions. We're going on to the EDI budget now. I've asked you a couple of questions on there. I will put in some more because I've got lots around that. But how would you assess whether the EDI budget is providing the right outcomes?
Well, and I can share this with you all. I've given you the headline numbers for the budget, but we have got a very clear programme of work attached to that spend, with very clear outcomes attached to that work.
Good.
So, we will be able to come back and tell you whether we think we've delivered with the money what we set out to do.
Okay, can you then send us all of that in advance? So can you send them to us now? I had lots of questions on this, but I'm mindful of these wretched trains that some of us, if we don't get, we won't get home. So I'll put those in. Thank you, Chair, and I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to move straight on to Assemblymember Best, who's going to ask some further questions.
Thank you. And my questions be around the corporate EDI action plan. I just wanted to flag as well, Mary, that obviously we had that conversation in the last under the last panel about intersectionality, which I agree with the chair. I don't dislike that word as well, but essentially what it says is looking at people as people, which I think is really important. And in the action plan here, that work was due for December 22, but it says not started. When I think we covered this earlier, and you said some like, and that's why I said I think it's being honest, and it hasn't, and it does say here not started.
Yes,
so when will that work begin?
Well, so that is absolutely a priority for the first half of next year. I mean, it remains on this year's programme. We're not bumping it into the next year's programme. So we will do some work on that in the next 3 months. And as I said, as we were talking about it before, we are, the first data. One of the first data downloads and set of insights we are requiring from TfL will be related to intersectionality.
First half of next year doesn't strike me as a urgent date, to be frank with you.
Well, so this programme, this is the 22-23 programme to the end of March. So we will be doing some real work on this area before the end of this programme, which are the first 3 months of next year.
Okay. Does the GLA have sufficient resources to ensure that the inclusion programme is delivered within the timescales, particularly all 42 recommendations from the Equality Group report?
Well, so part of the budget is going to fund additional resource. Again, one of the top recommendations from the Equal Group's report was, if you're serious about this, where's the money? I agree with Assemblymember Hall, this is not all about money, but we do need some additional resource. So, and you'll see this if I provide what we're using the money for, but we are giving, we're creating 4 new roles. We've got 4 roles in Shakira's team already, core corporate EDI roles. But we are creating 4 more to give the directorate, so Niran, Phil and others, additional support so that they can make sure that this work is being done in their directorates. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that quite a lot of the resource is also needed to deliver some of the career acceleration programmes, some of the talent work that we want to do. So I think we do have the resource now, and it was a very, very helpful, clear prompt from the Equal Group that we need to resource this programme properly. Those of us that have been working on it so far have been working flat out on it, and I think that's going to have to stay that way. But we have substantially more resource than we had before, and I think if we need more, I will go back and ask for more. But at the moment, I think we have what we need as set out in the draft budget.
Thanks. And I think you answered most of these questions actually to Assembly Member Hall, because I was going to ask about the reporting and it being complex, but I think there was an agreement earlier that there should be an improvements and review of that, so I'll skip over that. The one thing I did want to come back to, though, is one of the main recommendations here being pushed is around the diversity panels, and I know that I brought this up for you, Mary, last year on what is a diversity panel, because all kind of panels could be diverse, but what these panels mean is racial and gender diversity. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I think that's how they should be termed, because that's what it is. Because I think otherwise, I have this concern. There's a lot in the report that talks about the emotional labour of put on black and minority ethnic staff. And I feel like that puts even more stress to say, go in and be our diversity member. And, you know, if somebody who's transgender walks in, or if somebody who's disabled walks in, you're our advocate now, you know, for everyone. And how do you avoid that being the sentiment that comes out of this? That's my first concern. So, and I think perhaps putting, you know, saying it is racially and gendered diverse might be one way of saying what it actually is, instead of those people feeling like suddenly they've got the weight of, you know, every minority on their shoulders.
So this is an ongoing discussion, isn't it? And you're right, that is where we are focusing the diversity of these panels in the first instance. And, you know, we are holding everyone to account to make sure that they are diverse in those ways. But, you know, if we can get clearer on intersectionality and some of those options, I think we can get more sophisticated about the diversity of the panels. The other point I would just like to make is that we have managed to attract quite a large pool of staff, black, Asian, minority ethnic staff in particular, to train to sit on our diverse panels. 135 now, which does mean that particularly with small teams or small directorates, they're not looking to the same people each time to join their panels, which is, I think, where burdens were becoming unreasonable and people were feeling constantly asked and targeted to be on panels. But actually, we now do that across the organisation, and you know, my understanding is that quite a lot of staff see that as a really quite a good development opportunity and an opportunity to raise their own profiles as well. So we have done a lot of work to mitigate some of the problems related to you know, to our requirement for those diverse panels.
And so I see you, and I was going to literally come to you next on that, because that's the other thing that I think was clear to me, is it going to be the same people, especially those people that seem more willing, that are now suddenly called on every time to be on these panels? And one, the strain that causes, but also the strain, would they feel a strain in perhaps being with more senior members of staff or staff outside of their team who are actually like, well, you're just here to make up the numbers, I don't actually want your opinion. And those concerns, has anything like that come through the network? And
I think I can give my own experience here, actually, because in the first few months of the year, I did sit on, I think it was 70 interview panels within 3 months. And I think the intersectionality point is important because there's a huge lack of senior black men in the organisation. I know you touched on the kind of gender balance. So actually, I often tick both boxes, that I can be the man and the black person. I think there's good practice, though. I think, you know, in my own team, our recruitment, I'm always keen that we have an external person on the panel. So we've had community partners sit on our interview panels, strategic partners that we work with, to try and give a lens that maybe is a bit different to the normal GLA view, and I think that adds a richness to it. But I would agree with Mary about, actually, you know, the GLA has changed some of its kind of old school views about who can sit on panels, less bothered about, you know, people don't have to be, you know, higher grade to sit on a panel. And I would say that there is a huge development opportunity for our black Asian staff if they can sit on those, you know, sit on more senior interview panels and be exposed to senior staff. I think that's one of the things that there's a balance here. But my reading of the independent review is that actually we need to expose our Black Asian staff to more senior settings more regularly to help them develop, and we need to balance that with making sure that when they're exposed, they're protected and not judged for what they bring. And I think that I think the organisation accepts that.
Sorry, I don't know as well if online Letitia wanted to add to that at all.
Yeah, sorry, I agree with Solomon. It's not really my area of expertise, so I haven't explored it much. But yeah, I pretty much echo much of what Solomon said.
I mean, I think it is. I mean, I'm very glad to hear that. Hopefully, there won't be too many more people doing 70 sets of interviewing, because that is really above and beyond the call of definitely your day job, obviously, and that's an awful lot. So it's good to hear that 135 people have taken up doing the training, so that, because we also don't want people to go onto panels who haven't been trained. But I am still slightly concerned that we don't seem to be using legislation effectively where we have got underrepresentation in roles. For example, in our staff team, where women were underrepresented, we didn't seem to do targeted recruitment to employ more women, so we've gone ahead and appointed loads more blokes, and we didn't seem to do any targeted recruitment to say that, you know, black people and Asian people were underrepresented in our team. Consequently, we've gone ahead and recruited people who are neither black nor Asian. I mean, it still seems to me that there's a bit of refinement needed here in terms of how we approach this. I mean, I started using then what was the sex discrimination legislation and the Race Relations Act legislation, section 38 and 35, to do, you know, underrepresented at this level, particularly encouraged to apply. I mean, obviously you can't make it an exclusive recruitment, but we don't seem to be doing that or making much of an effort to really draw people in. If, you know, I'm looking at recruitment that's being done, and I would like to see that being pursued very vigorously, because it's the only way that we'll move beyond going from 32 to 34% and heading up towards 40% minimum.
So I think we are doing some of that very well in some parts of the organisation, because I think, you know, if I just reflect that 57% of our external applicants now are black, Asian or minority ethnic applicants. So we must be doing something better. That was 50% back in March, so that's gone up by 7 percentage points in the 6 months. And then that's flowing through, as I said, to 50% of appointments now, external appointments being of black, Asian or minority ethnic joiners. So something is changing in terms of the approach teams are taking in the places that they advertise and that they encourage people to apply. We can do more. And we need to make sure that those very good things are happening everywhere, which is the point we talked about before. And we're on that hunt to make sure that, you know, anything good is happening everywhere, not just somewhere. So I think that is beginning to happen. We just need to make sure that that is consistent. I think on the other point, I mean, again, we did exactly what Alan suggested to us in his report. You know, we make it very clear in all of our adverts now that we welcome candidates from, you know, underrepresented groups in the GLA, and you know, this oversight of the G10 plus appointments asks questions about the candidates in front of us and who's appointable and you know, whether or not somebody's from one of our underrepresented groups. So those things are happening, and I think they are driving some of this improvement.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm going to pass over to Assemblymember Ahmad, to whom Assemblymember McCartney has passed some questions, because we were doing that sort of earlier reshuffle.
Thank you. My first question is to Alan. Alan, is the GLA's response to the independent review sufficient to deal with the scale of the findings in the report, and what can the GLA learn from other organisations?
Yeah, it definitely is. 42 recommendations is a lot of recommendations for any organisation, but I believe in being thorough. I wasn't going to leave recommendations out that I thought they could respond to. How and when they respond to those recommendations is up to them. But from what I've seen of the progress they've made so far, I'm quite happy that they're going in the right direction. This work isn't exact science. You're going to have to refresh and review and constantly respond to the people that you're serving with it. So the progress they've made, I'm quite happy with. I don't think they've, from what I can see, made any missteps, and they are aware of where they're not ticking the boxes that they set out for themselves. In terms of how they can compare themselves to other organisations, I think it's looking at the reporting function. So Mary's already mentioned that one of the things that TfL are doing is an intersectional data analysis. I think that's something that a lot of companies need to do, and a lot of companies aren't doing very well. So looking at what companies are doing and where GLA could use that, but go one step further, is probably how they want to best. It's the only benchmarking I would do is like, how could we improve on that model for ourselves? I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much. Mary, my next question is to you. So it's good to see the progress that we are making, and the fact that we will receive as a committee reports every 6 months. In the earlier session, you yourself touched on the issue of culture, and you used the word about the culture within the organisation. And I'd just like to refer you to a quote from the Equal Group report, where they said that the policies themselves aren't the issue, but instead most likely how policy is applied differently across the GLA. It also found that as the culture has not been actively addressed in 2 decades since the GLA's establishment in 2020, much of that culture was embedded at the foundation of the organisation and will still likely remain in place today. Most staff will likely be passive practitioners of the culture, unaware of the detrimental effects it has on Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff, and unaware of even how the culture was born. So my question to you is, how do we embed that change throughout the organisation and change that culture? And how would you like to see the organisation, in terms of its culture, short, medium and long term, within the next 5 years?
I think everything that we have been talking about in the last hour, or maybe even 2 hours in the previous panel as well, has been about us working to change the culture of this organisation. I think we've already started to do that. I was looking to Solomon. I think we've already started to do that. I think there aren't many people in this organisation now who don't understand where we come from on EDI. Who don't understand that actually this is this EDI statement is really the sort of the core of what we need to be as an organisation. I mean, I host several of the induction sessions for new staff, and I read them this statement, and I say to them, if your heart isn't in this statement, your head and your heart, then you've joined the wrong organisation. So we are being very, very explicit about what our expectations are of new people and new culture. So I think that's important. I think the accountability piece is really, really important to changing culture. There wasn't much of that around when I started, I don't think, not in terms of organisation. People felt very accountable for things they were doing for London, but very little sense of us as an organisation being accountable for how we were and how we are, and that's what we're trying to achieve. So I want a culture where we really don't have to talk about some of this anymore, because it's just the way we are, and we of course will keep monitoring and keep working on it, but that actually it becomes something that is just absolutely part of the GLA. People have said to me over the last year or so, and I think this is quite right, it still feels a bit, for some people, as if this is something outside their main job. And Niran and I have both had people say to us, "What? This isn't part of my job." It absolutely is part of your job. So that's really where I want to go. I want people to actually to be able to read our EDI statement and say, "Yeah, that absolutely is the GLA today." Whereas at the moment it says this is the GLA we want to be.
So can you give me that timescale then? So short term, say within year and a half, within 3 years, and within 5 years, what would you like to see the organisation have achieved and be in a, how far along in terms of your aspirations will it be?
Well, I think certainly within a year and a half, if that was the first one, I think we absolutely need to have delivered all of Alan's recommendations, which obviously will, we've still got at least a year's work to do on that. We've got the corporate asks from the Race Equity Network, again in about the same time frame, which we need to deliver. So part of that is about actually delivering those recommendations, because in doing that, we would have shifted in a massive way. I think 3 years' time, I would be really disappointed if we are not at a workforce that represents London. And we may fall slightly short of it because, of course, the goalposts keep moving, but that's where I want to be. And then I also want to be in a position where there's no question that this is a good place to work, regardless of who you are. That's where I really want to be.
Okay, thank you very much. And my final question is to Letitia and to Solomon. And Solomon, you gave a really good example in terms of actually answering the question that I'm going to ask. So what is the most important thing that the GLA could do to improve the experiences of its Black, Asian and minority ethnic staff? And Solomon, you talked about their exposure to senior staff, which I thought was a very good example. Letitia, would you like to start with that, please?
You may be on mute.
Yeah, the button's stuck. Apologies. I think one of the most important things that the GLA could do is to continue its focus in terms of creating safe spaces for BAME staff so that they can cultivate an environment in which they feel confident and safe in terms of being able to raise their concerns to the organisation.
Thank you. And Solomon, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, thanks for letting Letitia go first as well. I think actually it links back to Mary's point about culture, because I think to have an inclusive culture, you have to exclude some people. In the sense that I think Mary's statement was powerful to say if you don't have these set of values, you shouldn't be in this organisation. And that isn't, that is us actively saying that there are certain people that we don't want to work here, and that's a really important part of it. I think actually my advice would be very much that one of my big frustrations with the GLA culture is that it's not we don't allow ourselves to fail. And I think the scrutiny process is important in this, because I think we see an executive team that wants to get everything right and do good, because there's also a fear of what is the scrutiny going to be from the Assembly if we do something awfully wrong. And actually, if we look at evidence from, how gender pay gaps have been reduced, lots of people say, well, we just tried loads of different things. And I think the single biggest thing that the GLA can do is just give stuff a go and not get too bogged down with, you know, the very literal process of, you know, action plans are important, and I'm probably saying it sounds like they're not important because I'm not a HR specialist, but I think there is a part of, you know, we should just give things a go. We don't have that long to get this done, and then actually, you know, the network wants the organisation to succeed, the executive team wants it to succeed, I assume the Assembly wants it to succeed, so we should all really allow room for us to fail and ask the questions why, you know, did that not go well, rather than holding us to too high a standard on it, I think.
Okay, all right, thank you, Chair. That's the end of our question and answer session with the guests who are still with us, and I'd like to thank Mary and Niran for staying on for the second panel, Alan for joining us, but I'd particularly like to thank Letitia and Solomon from the Race Equality Network. We're very glad that you felt able to join us. Obviously, normally we would be mostly holding the executive directors and the chief executive accountable through this. So I hope that didn't feel as though we were trying to sort of hold you accountable, but it has been very helpful to have your additional contributions. And also, could you thank the other members of the network, including those who were able to meet with some members of the committee on an informal and private basis in the lead up to this meeting, which we also found extremely helpful. I'm now going to move on to conclude the meeting. This is the point at which I'm going to say to the other guests, if you do want to leave, feel free to do so. I'm going to take agenda item 9, now that we've had that discussion. Is everyone happy to note the workforce report? Agenda item 10, are we happy to note progress to date on Equal Group's recommendations? And are we happy to receive a separate report on work to address disability inequality at a future meeting? Thank you. In respect of agenda item 11, can I ask you to note the report that we received as background to putting the questions? And could you also delegate authority to me as the chair in consultation with the deputy chair and party group lead members to agree any outputs arising from the discussion? Item 12 is the GLA Oversight Committee work programme. Can we note the committee's work programme for 22-23? The date of the next meeting is the 12th of January 2023 at 2 p.m. in the chamber. There is no other business that I consider to be urgent. This meeting is closed.